They're not vampires, though they're highly sensitive to blood. They're not krakens, but they lurk below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. And they're not just a prop for B-list Hollywood movies. They're sharks, and they're as real as you and I. Welcome to Fierce's Shark Marathon, a collection of some of the most gruesome stories involving the most feared fish on our planet. After hearing these stories, you might want to think twice before swimming in the ocean. Three-time surfing world champion Mick Fanning could have surfed his last wave on the 19th of July, 2015. He was competing in the J-Bay Open, an event on the World Surf League Champion Tour. It took place in Jeffreys Bay on South Africa's Eastern Cape. It's a beautiful location, world famous for its incredible surf and excellent whale watching opportunities. Tourists and locals alike visit the bay to enjoy the water sports and marine wildlife. For Mick, he was competing in the final of the Open. He and competitor Julian Wilson, who was a fellow Australian professional surfer, were in the water together. The event was being broadcast live on the television. Mick's mother was watching her son on the screen from Australia's Gold Coast. Less than 2 minutes into his final run, horrified viewers spotted a dorsal fin break through the surface of the ocean, just feet from where Mick was lying on his board. Initially, Mick was unaware of the imminent danger he was in. He was scouting the waves for his next ride to bring the competition home, looking far out into the ocean. He was counting the seconds until the next barrel he could take to win the competition. He knew what to do. He was used to the pressure. He had been surfing since he was 3 years old. As a surfer, Mick said that you would always think about sharks. You are aware of them. Sometimes you spot a fin a little distance away, and you always hear of attacks, but somehow you never believe it's going to happen to you. And statistically, it is very, very unlikely to happen to any individual. But when we enter the water, we are entering their domain. During the competition, Mick felt good. He was excited by the performance he was giving. He was peaking at the right time, and his body felt good as he rode down the barrels. But this shark came from his side, torpedoing towards the surfer as he bobbed on the surface, lying face down on his board. Just 2 minutes into his final run of the contest, Mick spotted the dorsal fin, maybe a millisecond after the spectators did. It protruded from the water next to him. Immediately, the adrenaline started pumping, and Mick had no time to react. Within a second, the shark had become entangled in his surfboard cord as it came in for a bite. The cord tugged on Mick's ankle. He scrambled about on his board, trying desperately to hold on. He kicked with his legs and pulled with his arms. He needed to stay out of the water. Looking down in the water, Mick could see the pectoral fin just below the surface as the shark began thrashing around. He realized very quickly how bad the situation was. He suddenly panicked, thinking that this was it. His mom was home on the Gold Coast of Australia. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the shark coming for her son. There was nothing she could do except for stare in horror as the attack unfolded. She thought he was gone. She thought she had witnessed her son's death live on international television, a sight that will continue to haunt her. She had already lost one son, Sean, in a car accident 17 years ago. In those terrifying seconds, she thought that the universe can't be that cruel. She can't possibly lose 2 sons. Then, as Mick was pulled from his board and disappeared underwater, a large wave came sweeping in. It was a huge roller. It blocked everyone's view. Nobody knew what happened to Mick. Nobody knew if they would see him again. When the wave rolled in and dissipated, what would be waiting for them on the other side? Had they just witnessed arguably the best surfer of all time demolished by a great white? But behind that wave, hidden from view, Mick was fighting. He was fighting for his life. The shark had knocked him off his board and into the water. Stunned, Mick looked around, just feet from his board, to see the shark coming back for him again. In the split seconds that followed, the shark rushed past Mick in the water. As it nearly brushed him, Mick punched it as hard as he could on its side, between the dorsal fin and the pectoral fin. The shark broke through the ankle cord, releasing Mick from his surfboard. At that moment, Mick made a dash for it. He couldn't ride a wave in without his board. Instead, he swam as fast as he could, desperately trying to make it to the shore and the waiting crowd. The shark sirens were wailing across the bay. The crowd was in a frenzy, and Mick suddenly stopped. There was a heart-stopping moment when Mick realized he couldn't outswim a shark. He knew if it was coming after him, it would take him from behind. It could be chasing after him right now. He wouldn't be able to react. He wouldn't be able to see its approach. So instead of fleeing, Mick decided to turn and face the predator. At least now he would have a chance of seeing it coming for him. He could see his feet just below the surface, but he could see no further. He knew he had that length of time to react if the shark came at him, just a few feet. He tried to get as high as he could in the water. He needed to give himself the best chance possible of spotting the shark before it took a bite. In those terrifying moments when Mick was treading water, hoping upon hope that the shark had finished with him, he felt alone. Watched by millions around the world and a huge crowd on the beach, he has never felt so alone. But luckily for Mick, help was on its way. His competitor and friend, Julian Wilson, paddled ferociously over to him. But the safety jet skis and boats got there first. They stormed towards Mick, grabbing him and pulling him and Julian out of the water and onto their jet skis, and then into the safety speedboat. Mick was rushed back to shore. The adrenaline that had been surging through Mick now wore off, and when he made it back to dry land and met up with his friends, all with tears in their eyes, the shock of what had just happened began to sink in. It was an emotional end to a long day. The event was called off, and Mick went back to his base to reflect on the events. He fired up the barbecue and sank a few beers with his mates. He and his friends celebrated his survival. It was like a wake for him, but with him there. But it could have been a very different ending. Mick flew back to Australia the next day. He went straight away to visit his mother. It was an emotional reunion. It took him less than a week to get back in the water. He was still shaken from his experience, but he believed that if he didn't get back in the water soon after the attack, that he wasn't ever going to. And surfing had been his life for so long. To give it up after his experience wasn't the ending to his career that he had dreamt of. Ironically and terrifyingly, on his first surf back in the water after the attack, he spotted a fin in the water a short distance away and hurriedly rowed his board back to the beach, where his mother was waiting for him. For a while afterwards, Mick said that he still suffered from nightmares. He says that now, when he enters the water, there is the fear of the unknown. You can't see something like that coming. There is no preparing for such an attack. His mother said that she was anxious but happy for him to return to the water, and Mick said that he'll look over his shoulder more now when he's out there beyond the breakers. 20-year-old Lana Jutterop had left her West Germany home to work as an au pair in the Seattle suburb of Issaquah. She spent her time looking after 4-year-old twins and their 5-year-old brother, but after a year on the job, she booked a vacation to Hawaii. She left Seattle in August and planned to return to Germany in September. She and her friends headed to Palauea Beach in Makena on the Hawaiian island of Maui. Also known as White Rock Beach, it's less busy than some of Maui's hotspots. The golden sands are flanked by volcanic rock. To the north side, there is excellent snorkeling, with rock pools for those less inclined to enter the water. Sea turtles frequent the area, and colorful sea life clings to the volcanic rocks. The beach gently slopes into the water, making it a popular swimming spot for locals, but it's often regarded as a relatively unused beach by visitors. With less crowds, it feels like a little piece of paradise, away from the hustle and bustle of the large towns, away from the throng of tourists. On Wednesday, August 14, 2013, Lana entered the warm water. The water was choppy, little wavelets formed on the surface. She pulled a mask and snorkel over her face, slipped into her fins, and dipped her face into the ocean. Beneath the surface, visibility was poor, but brightly colored fish darted everywhere. It was a beautiful wildlife haven. But Lana wasn't alone. The tranquil underwater scene was about to change. The peace and beauty were about to become a scene from a nightmare, a bloodbath. A shark homed in on the shallows, scouring the ocean for a meal, an opportunistic hunter. It spotted Lana swimming at the surface. She was 100 yards from shore. She didn't see the shark approaching. It came at her with terrific speed, torpedoing upwards. It struck her from below. The hit knocked the air from Yana's lungs as she flew into the air. Disoriented, Yana scrambled about in the water, and then she felt a firm tug on her arm. She looked to her side, and a shark had her whole arm in its jaws. The nose of the shark was just inches from Yana's face. She looked right into the shark's eyes. The pressure in her arm built until it felt like it would snap, and then shockingly, it did. The shark severed Yana's arm from her body. Blood poured into the ocean. Yana screamed for help. The shark submerged below the surface. Frantically, Yana kicked and kicked, trying to make it to shore. She was losing blood rapidly. She didn't think she was going to make it. The attack had been too brutal, too forceful. Her group of friends could see her splashing about in the water, and they cried out, but none of them dared to go into the water to save her. 57-year-old Rick Moore, who was vacationing from California with his friend Nicholas Grisafi, heard a blood-curdling scream from the beach. The two men turned around and looked out to sea. They could see Yana struggling 100 yards out. She was surrounded in a sea of red. Without hesitating, Rick ran into the water. He swam as fast as he could, right into the middle of the cloud of blood. Less than 10 feet from the young German, he noticed her arm was missing. It had been torn completely off. He told her to grab hold of him with her other arm as he supported her head. Then, swimming on his back toward the shore, he kicked for dry land. It was slow but steady progress. As he tried to calm Yana, it suddenly dawned on him just how much danger he had put himself in. The shark was still in the area. He was carrying wounded prey, surrounded by blood. He could have been attacked by the shark at any time. Other sharks could have been drawn to the area, enticed by the smell of fresh blood. Still, he kicked, continuing to progress toward dry land. All the while, Yana was terrified she was going to die. She kept repeating it over and over, telling Rick that she wasn't going to make it. "I'm dying," she said. "I know I'm going to die." Rick tried to reassure her, but he knew that with each passing second, the young woman's chances of survival were fading. He prayed out loud to God. He prayed for protection from the shark. He prayed that they made it to shore safely. He was worried that at any second he would see the telltale sign of a shark, its fin slicing through the water towards them, a sharp tug on his legs as it dragged him underwater. But he was determined to make it, determined to get to dry land. When they were close to the beach, Rick's friend Nicholas waded into the shallows. The water came up to his neck, and he took Yana from Rick and pulled her onto the beach. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. She had lost so much blood that it no longer poured from her open wound. As they laid Yana down on the sand, 23-year-old Joshua Craddock from London called the emergency services. He had watched the whole rescue. He was awestruck by Rick's bravery as the man had dived into the blood-stained water. They lifted Yana onto a makeshift stretcher, a beachgoer's kayak, and carried her up the trail to the street. Yana's friends did nothing to help the situation. They were understandably in a state of shock, but they left it up to strangers and passers-by to help their friend. They cried as they watched their bikini-clad friend pulled from the sea, covered in blood and missing an arm. When they arrived at the street, a police officer tied a tourniquet around Yana's shoulder. She was barely conscious by this point. Her breaths became shallow, her heartbeat faint. Then she stopped breathing. Immediately, high school teachers Rick and Nicholas began performing CPR. Yana's friends just stood there watching until an ambulance arrived and rushed Yana to Maui Memorial Medical Center. Rick and Nicholas visited her at the medical center 2 days later. Doctors told them that she was in stable condition. It looked like Yana might make it, but 2 days later, she became critically ill and was placed on life support. Tragically, Yana lost her fight 1 week after the attack. Despite doctors' best efforts, she didn't survive. Her family spoke of the enthusiastic, happy young woman that Yana was. She was beautiful and strong and will always be remembered laughing. Rick and Nicholas reflected on the attack. They replayed the ordeal over and over in their minds. They prayed for Yana's recovery. Nicholas wonders whether he had done enough. He questions whether he should have swum out to help Rick bring Yana in. Maybe he should have pulled on his fins and helped pull her to shore. She would have made it to dry land quicker, saving precious time. Nicholas said that the attack has affected him. He still goes into the water, but he won't stray far from the beach. It was a terrible thing to have happened to someone so young, and for those involved in the rescue, it'll likely remain vivid in their memory for the rest of their lives. In May 2023, 18-year-old Cameron Robbins was attending his high school graduation ceremony. He had graduated from the University Laboratory School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Days later, he would be dead. He had attended the school for 13 years and had been a well-liked and well-respected pupil. He was devoted to his studies and was a fierce competitor on the baseball field, described as a star athlete. But the young man's bright future was about to come to a sudden and devastating end. To celebrate finishing school, Cameron and his friends headed to the Bahamas. Situated just off the coast of Florida, they are a popular destination for American tourists. Dozens of high school seniors flock to the islands seeking adventure, relaxation, and a good time. They arrived at the incredible Atlantis Hotel on Paradise Island on the island of Nassau. Excitement was building as the youngsters explored the incredible location. They had studied hard, and now it was time to play hard. There was no time to unpack. Some of the students had organized a pirate-themed boat trip at sunset. They were going to have the party of their lives aboard a sailing ship as the sun went down. They boarded Blackbeard's Revenge that evening. Advertised as the only pirate ship in the Bahamas, the boat is an impressive three-masted wooden sailing vessel that can be hired for private parties. It offers the use of a full cash bar and provides food on request. The music started up, the drinks were poured, and everyone chatted, laughed, and danced as they set sail from the mainland. But for Cameron, he would never set foot on the mainland again. He was about to walk the plank that night. As the alcohol flowed and the youngsters were enjoying themselves out on the open ocean, the weather closed in. The sun started to set and darkness descended over the water. There was a chill in the air, but the alcohol on the booze cruise warmed the passengers. The weather didn't dampen their spirits. The heavy thump of the bass beat, the noisy chatter of the students, all sent vibrations down through the boat's hull and into the water. The muffled sounds emanated across the sea and into the deep. When the boat reached Atoll Island at about 11:30 p.m., it began to turn around and head back to the mainland. Atoll Island lies less than a mile east of Paradise Island. It is uninhabited, and at 2 miles long, it's a popular spot for snorkeling in the National Marine Park. Despite the poor weather, most of those on board wore only their swimming costumes. As the chatter turned to banter, someone dared Cameron to jump off the boat. Was he man enough to do it? Was he brave enough? It was quite a jump into the dark waters below. The high sides of the sailing vessel were several feet above the surface of the ocean, but with the invincibility cloak that alcohol brings, Cameron accepted the challenge. He climbed up onto the ship's side and stood there, teetering on the edge. A few of his friends grabbed him and pulled him back down. He was being silly. He was drunk and careless. But he knew he could do it. He knew he could jump into the water and be back out again in seconds. He was up for the challenge. Whilst his friends tried to stop him, he broke free from their grip and ran back toward the side of the boat. Amidst cheers from the crowd, he leapt overboard in his swimming shorts. One of his friends filmed the jump on their phone. Everyone ran to the side of the boat and watched as Cameron splashed in the water. Someone shouted, "Bye-bye," as the 18-year-old drifted from the boat. He was surrounded by darkness, the black water below him, the black sky above him. But he wasn't alone in the water. Something circled him immediately. A friend threw him a life ring, but instead of swimming towards it, Cameron swam away. He was agitated about something. He had noticed a swirl in the water beside him. He kicked with his legs when something brushed past him. His friends on board Blackbeard's Revenge shouted at him to grab the buoy, but Cameron didn't respond. Fear gripped him as he tried to swim away from whatever it was in the water with him. In the darkness, people could see his white body in the water as he continually looked around nervously. Then he was engulfed by the darkness. Within seconds of entering the water, his friends lost sight of him. Had he been dragged underwater? They shouted for him, straining their eyes in the dark, but he didn't respond. Not a splash or a shout. Not a cry or a scream. He simply vanished into the blackness. The boat stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning searching for Cameron, but there was no sign of him. His friends grew frantic with worry. The Coast Guard was called and a search ensued. The people on board were cold and wet. They were tearful and afraid. Had they just seen the last of their classmate? As daylight broke the following day, an immense search was launched for Cameron. Had he drifted back to shore or onto one of the islands? The Royal Bahamas Defense Force conducted the search alongside the U.S. Coast Guard. Boats and planes were deployed to the area, covering hundreds of miles of ocean. Cameron's parents flew out to the Bahamas to assist in the operation, but after just 2 days, the search was called off. There was no way that Cameron could have survived that long in the sea. He wasn't wearing a life jacket, and the seas were known to be shark-infested. When officials played back the grainy mobile phone footage of Cameron jumping into the water, they spotted something terrifying. Just coming into shot as Cameron tread water appearing to be agitated, the outline of a shark emerged. It was just a few feet away from the teen. It broke the surface of the water right in front of the youngster, its speed and agility visible from the split second in which it came toward Cameron. It darted away from him at the last moment, but Cameron had seen it. He knew he was in trouble and began swimming in the opposite direction. It also looks as though he is grabbed by something just out of sight, pulling him down under the water. That's the last his friends ever saw of him. Bull sharks are known to frequent the Bahamian waters. They are the most aggressive of their kind, and bulls are responsible for most of the fatal attacks that occur there. To those of us sitting at home watching this video, it's easy to say that Cameron was foolish to jump into the water that night. But he was a young man, celebrating his achievements and enjoying his time with his friends. And if he had thought about the dangers that lurked in the waters, if he had been told that that particular spot was known to be shark-infested, then he likely wouldn't have jumped. But in the moment, he was doing what many young people do, and that was fooling around, having fun and being daring at the same time. His family is obviously distraught at Cameron's death. No trace of him has ever been found. There is still speculation about whether a shark took him or whether the strong currents did. Either way, the haunting video that recorded his final moments is a chilling reminder of just how fragile life is. It was February 4th, 2023, a sunny summer day in North Fremantle, a suburb of Perth, Australia. 16-year-old Stella Berry was having a beautiful day with her friends. The group of teenagers were enjoying the warm rays of the sun and the cooling water of Swan River. The atmosphere was greatly improved by their jet skis. The teens were having a blast, racing and laughing. At some point during the day, they even spent magical moments jumping from a nearby traffic bridge rope swing. Everything was great, just perfect for the teens and sunny personalities. At 16 years old, Stella Berry was the life of the party. Her laugh was infectious, and she was nothing but happy, vibrant, and quick-witted. Stella had her skipper's ticket and often took friends out on the river for a day of surfing. She loved the beach and the river, so spending a day at Swan River was far from unusual for the girl. The Swan River estuary flows through Perth. It's a significant part of the city's culture, providing the perfect environment for several water sports, such as rowing, jet skiing, surfing, sailing, and swimming. But Swan River is also a place for modern humans to get in touch with nature, or better yet, to remember nature rules all. The river creates a stunning contrast against the skyline of city high-rises. There are over 130 species of fish, including everything from brim, blowfish, and sharks. There are also dolphins calling the river home and making an appearance every now and then, stunning swimmers. On the afternoon of February 4th, 2023, 16-year-old Stella Berry and her friends were relaxing near the Fremantle traffic bridge. The bridge links the suburbs of North Fremantle and Fremantle. As the teenagers soaked in the sun, enjoying summer, Stella spotted something in the water. She watched in awe. It was a pod of dolphins, swimming freely, not a care in their world. Their beauty was astounding. In all fairness, it must have looked like a painting. In an instant, Stella Berry shot up and alerted her friends. She wanted to go swim with the dolphins. It was an exciting plan, maybe a little bit crazy, but nothing unheard of. Stella and one of her friends got on the jet skis and rushed toward the dolphins, passing through the bridge. They stopped their jet skis near the beach. Then Stella jumped into the water, intent on swimming with the pod of dolphins. She had no way of telling what was going to happen next. The river was brown and murky. Its opaqueness made it impossible for the girl to see what was lurking in the water. It wasn't like Stella was completely clueless about the usual dangers posed by Australian waters. Not only was she a generally intelligent young woman, but she also had a particularly impressive understanding of the ocean and its sharks. Back when she was 10 years old in 2017, Stella was featured in a local paper for her design of a shark-free ocean pool for Perth's Cottesloe Beach. Her project was presented to the city council after great white sharks had been spotted in the area, and the city prompted an open call for ideas. Being ambitious and smart students, Stella and a classmate developed an impressive design and garnered praise from officials over the assignment. But perhaps her knowledge extended to the ocean. Perhaps Stella didn't know the river was as dangerous as the ocean, with hungry creatures waiting for the opportunity to strike any prey. And surely a 16-year-old swimming alone in murky waters away from shore does qualify as prey. Stella Berry didn't get too far away from her jet ski. She never reached the dolphins, never got to swim with them and create a magical, perfect moment. Instead, something big, something with huge, sharp teeth, grabbed her leg. Pain engulfed her. The water turned red as the shark kept biting the girl. Stella thrashed and tried to get away from the creature, but it was no use. The noise of her erratic movements caught the attention of several people on the shore. One of them, a local man, bravely jumped in the water and managed to get Stella on the sand. Her friends watched in shock, traumatized by the terrible state their friend was in. How was it possible? One minute, she was her usual self, laughing and joking around, and the next, there she was, gravely injured, bleeding out on the beach. Paramedics were called, but despite their best efforts, nothing could be done to save the 16-year-old student. Her injuries were horrible. Stella Berry was declared dead at the scene at about 6 p.m. A day of fun turned into a tragedy. After the incident, other people at the river were warned against entering the water. 16-year-old Joshua Banks and two of his friends had been swimming and jumping off for about an hour in that area. They had actually seen Stella approaching on her jet ski, but they had no idea about the attack. Were it not for some friendly locals, they would have returned to swim there. Friends and family tried to make sense of Stella's untimely death. Her whole community was shaken by the loss of such a promising young woman. It was the first fatal shark attack in the Swan River since 1923. Matt and Sophie Berry, Stella's parents, were devastated by the huge loss. They said in an official statement, Stella was a vibrant and happy girl with plans of living in Europe after school. She was a caring person and was a dear friend to many across a variety of schools in the area. She had an infectious laugh, which we couldn't help laughing at too when we heard it. She was a beautiful and loving big sister and the best daughter we could have hoped for. On Sunday, a day after the attack, some of Stella's friends gathered on the banks of the river near the spot the girl was attacked. They remembered their beloved friend, crying and holding each other. Two of Stella's friends vowed to carry out their friend's wish and run a marathon in her honor and memory. Authorities declared that it was unusual for a shark to be that far down the river, but not impossible. This time of year, sharks are in the river more than normal. It's the breeding period. The females move into the river and the males chase them, said Professor Coulomb Brown, the director of higher degree research biology at Macquarie University. Authorities also admitted that while a great deal has been done to prevent shark attacks in the ocean, the river was another matter. Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan declared that implementing flying helicopter patrol isn't possible on the river because the water is brown. Other measures are being considered, such as shark barriers, which form a fully enclosed swimming area that prevents large marine creatures such as sharks from entering the area. If you're being attacked by a shark, experts advise you to always fight back. Don't look away from the animal and use your strength and size to your advantage. Since the shark's nose, eyes, and gills are extremely sensitive, you should hit those areas hard. The worst thing you could do is play dead, because sharks are known scavengers and won't say no to an easy meal. This is the story of Jaimy Daigle, a young girl who ventured too far into the shark-filled waters of the Gulf of Mexico and paid with her life. It's a tragic, heartbreaking story, but it's also a story about how multiple people came together and tried to save a life. It was June 25, 2005, and 14-year-old Jaimy Daigle was on vacation with her friends. The teenager had just recently graduated 8th grade with honors, and she had plans to attend St. Joseph's Academy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Jaimy herself was a Louisiana resident. The girl lived in the city of Gonzales. Her family, meaning her parents, Ronnie and Wendy, and her older brother Nicholas, were back home, but Jaimy was visiting Florida. In fact, on that Saturday, June 25, 2005, Jaimy was enjoying the waves of a Florida Panhandle beach. The Florida Panhandle is the name of the northwestern part of the state. The region is about 200 miles long and 50 to 100 miles wide, and it boasts some of Florida's most amazing beaches. The region's home to everything from quaint fishing villages to popular beachside cities. The climate is favorable all year round, with plenty of activities to satisfy the more adventurous tourists, those who'd rather go scuba diving than simply sunbathe on the shore. Jaimy and her friends were on a beach bordering the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf is old, older than most our minds can easily comprehend. It's 300 million years old. Over its long existence, it certainly witnessed countless events, and on that warm June day in 2005, the Gulf was once again a silent witness to a tragedy. Before this vacation in Florida, 14-year-old Jaimy Daigle had spent part of her summer vacation volunteering at her church's summer camp for young children. She was now spending some well-deserved time with her friends before her first year of high school started, but as fate had it, Jaimy was never going to be a freshman. The day started well. Jaimy and her friend 14-year-old Felicia Venable played on the beach and swam in the Gulf's waters. They were having a great time, enjoying themselves and their time at the beach. Then the two teenage girls started venturing further and further from shore, beyond the first sandbar. Then the two of them passed the second sandbar too. Suddenly, Jaimy and Felicia found themselves about 100 yards from shore, too far from the keen eyes of any lifeguard or worrying adult. It's unclear why the girls swam that far away from land. Maybe they were just having fun and wanted to test their limits, or maybe they didn't think about it at all. It proved to be a fatal mistake. As the two of them were happily swimming and splashing around, they saw a dark shadow below the surface coming their way. Before they could do anything at all, the shadow became something far more dangerous. It was a shark, and a hungry one at that. Its small beady eyes and its sensitive nose were focused on one thing and one thing only: finding prey. The girls, so far away from any possible shape or form of help, were an easy target. They had no time to act. The beast struck, closing its jaws around Jaimy Daigle's leg. The shark pulled the girl underwater. When it broke away, the animal took part of Jaimy's leg with it. The girl's flesh was torn from hip to knee, exposing her bone. It took only an instant for blood to pool around Jaimy, turning the water crimson. Terrified and almost hysterical, Felicia Venable, Jaimy's friend, started swimming erratically toward the shore. She had just witnessed her friend being dragged under the waves and mauled by a fierce animal. Her horrified screams filled the air, which in turn caught the attention of several other beachgoers. They all sprung into action, although not all of them were entirely sure what had really happened out there. 23-year-old Chris White, a state health inspector and volunteer firefighter who had just gotten his EMT license, didn't know there was a shark in the water. He just saw a screaming girl swimming frantically toward the shore and an empty boogie board with no rider. At first, he thought maybe the other girl had gone under or drowned. Nonetheless, he sprung into action. Another beachgoer, Robert Atkinson, who was watching on shore, saw a fin and a pool of blood in the water. His stomach dropped, despite the feeling that the whole scene looked like something out of a bad movie. But Atkinson knew it was real. There was no cheap horror movie being filmed on the beach that day. What he saw was a nightmare, a real one. Back in the water, there was another man who noticed something was wrong and took matters into his own hands. Tim Daigle, a 54-year-old surfer, had also been enjoying the waves that day when he heard a scream. The man looked around, and that's when he spotted Jaimy Daigle's friend Felicia swimming as fast as she could toward the shore. The young girl seemed desperate to get away from something. It took a moment for Daigle to reach the spot that terrified Felicia so much. When he got there, he suddenly understood the girl. Tim Daigle saw 14-year-old Jaimy face down in a crimson-colored bloody circle of water. It wasn't hard to figure all that blood was coming from the girl. And it didn't take too long for Daigle to notice he and the girl weren't the only beings out there. When he looked in the water, Daigle saw a shark. It was obvious the animal had attacked the girl, and by the looks of it, it wanted to try some more. The beast was about to come up and attack again. Daigle put the girl, who by then was already unconscious, on his surfboard. The hungry shark didn't waste the moment. It tried to bite Jaimy's hand off. But Daigle and the other people who wanted to help the girl weren't just about to let the animal win. The 54-year-old surfer started towing the girl Jaimy towards shore, the shark close behind. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Chris was swimming toward the pair, wanting to help. He passed Felicia Venable, Jamie's friend, but the girl couldn't tell him anything about what happened out there. She was terrified, unable to speak properly. Shortly before Chris White reached Daigle and Jaimy, he could hear Daigle screaming and hollering. "There's a shark! There's a shark!" the older man screamed. White and another man with a raft reached Jaimy Daigle, who was still unconscious, and Tim Daigle. The waters were moving unnaturally around them. The shark was close by, waiting for a perfect moment to strike again. Chris White grabbed the girl off Daigle's board and pulled her into the raft. He tried not to think about the shark, which was swimming at his feet. But none of them could afford to be attacked. For a while, all the brave rescuers stopped swimming, their bodies going limp and standing vertical in the water. They only dared gently dangling their legs. They were trying to look less like food. It was Daigle who took charge of the situation. The surfer punched the shark in the nose, which deterred its attack for a little while, just enough to let them gather the courage to continue swimming toward the shore. It was hell. The shark wouldn't give up, despite Daigle's best efforts to scare it off. 6 times the shark tried to attack, and all 6 times were met with the surfer's firm responses. When splashing the water to confuse the animal didn't work anymore, Daigle repeatedly punched it in the nose. And then they finally managed to get Jaimy Daigle to the shore, but it was too late for the 14-year-old girl. Paramedics were unable to revive her. The girl was dead. Authorities closed a 20-mile stretch of shore, but reopened it the following day, on Sunday, June 26, 2005. Despite this, residents living in a building next to the beach spotted a shark about 6 feet long, right at the shoreline on that morning. A makeshift memorial was created on the beach in Jaimy's memory. The tragedy was best summed up by Gonzales Police Chief Bill Landry, who was interviewed at Jaimy's funeral. The man said, "You know, an innocent young lady who was enjoying the prime of her life, to learn what it means to be a teenager, to enjoy what it's like to enjoy high school and prom, and everything that comes with the simple things in life. And she won't get to experience that anymore." On June 8, 2023, Yuri Popov and his 23-year-old son Vladimir headed to the waterfront next to the Dream Beach Hotel at the Egyptian resort of Hurghada. The pair, originally from Russia, had moved to Egypt several months before. It's reported that Vladimir was born in the subarctic city of Arkhangelsk in Russia before moving to Moscow. During the war with Ukraine, he moved to Egypt, apparently to avoid conscription into the army. His family had bought a property in the city of Hurghada, where Vladimir was working remotely as an IT specialist. On this particular day, he and his family were visiting the beach to relax and enjoy the cool waters of the Red Sea. The beach was busy. The water was full of locals and tourists swimming and splashing about in the shallows. Vladimir joined them. While his father remained on the sand, he took a dip. People were sliding down slides, landing in the water with a splash as children shrieked with excitement. A ladder lowered others into the water. The Red Sea Resort was popular, and the beach and the sea were its main attractions. People felt safe there. It was a life-guarded stretch of water, and the sea was calm. Not long after Vladimir entered the water, he heard shouts of concern. He looked around. Turning his head, he could see other swimmers heading for the beach. Holidaymakers screamed at the young man. Then he saw it, the telltale dorsal fin of a shark breaking through the surface of the ocean. It was large, dark gray, slicing through the water like a knife through butter. It circled Vladimir, its circles getting smaller and smaller. He made a dash for it, but he had left it too late. While others managed to get to safety, Vladimir had been targeted by the shark. It had locked its eyes onto the youngster from deep below the surface. The Russian's fate was now sealed. He hadn't spotted it in time. He was too far from the shore. The shark made a beeline for the swimmer and grabbed him. He was seen thrashing around in the water. He spun around and around as the shark tightened its grip and began to drag him downwards underwater. Amongst the commotion, Vladimir's legs were seen kicking above the water as he fought back. He was flipped over by the shark, disoriented and bloodied. Vladimir was then released and bobbed back up to the surface. The thrashing stopped. For a few heart-stopping moments, there was stillness. Vladimir, who was clearly injured as seen from the red-stained water surrounding him, could be seen beginning to swim back toward the shore. Was he going to make it? Maybe the shark had taken one bite and realized this was not its usual prey. Nervously, Vladimir summoned all his strength and headed toward dry land, but he only made it a few strokes. The ominous and terrifying shadow of the shark could be seen turning around and heading back for him. It hadn't finished its attack. It hadn't made a mistake. It knew this prey was injured. It was getting weaker, and it now came in for the kill. Vladimir cried out to his father on the beach. "Papa, Papa!" A desperate plea for help as the shark swam toward him again. It latched onto him, its huge jaws closing around his torso, pulling him underwater once more. The sea bubbled and boiled. The shark had him firmly in its jaws and thrashed, its body rising up and out of the water. Again and again it rolled, over and over, a commotion of tail and fins as it flapped wildly. By now, Vladimir was no longer visible. The shark pulled him under, never to be seen alive again. A lifeguard from a nearby hotel rushed to the man's aid. As soon as the attack began, he jumped into a speedboat, and the engine burst into life, motoring toward the action. But it was too late. There was nothing anybody could do. They arrived on the scene just seconds too late. The man's body had disappeared from sight. Although the attack will play out in people's minds over and over, each wondering if they could have done something, it only lasted a matter of seconds, about 20 seconds in total. It had been a ferocious and brutal attack. For Yuri to witness his son's death must have been devastating. Unable to help, unable to reach him, watching him take his last breath. Knowing that Vladimir was fighting for his life, knowing that he was desperately trying to get back to shore, but he was all alone out there, fighting a losing battle. It must have been absolutely heartbreaking, a traumatic thing to witness. Vladimir's girlfriend, Anastasia, was also said to be in the water at the time of the attack. Some said that Vladimir warned her to swim away, protecting her from the imminent attack. Another Russian lady, devastated and distraught from witnessing the attack, was comforted by others on the sand. It's not known whether she was related to the family or not. Eyewitnesses, clearly traumatized from the tragic death, reported seeing the shark taking chunks out of Vladimir's body for up to 2 hours after the attack, dragging his body underwater again and again. Authorities launched a search for the Tigershark. It had remained in the area and was easy to spot from the speedboats. They circled the large animal, trailing behind them fishing nets. When it was caught in the net, it was dragged ashore and up onto the beach. As it lay there, its fins and tail wrapped in rope, it was clubbed to death as it squirmed and gasped. Men with metal bars and wooden sticks beat the animal again and again on the head and snout, another brutal and unforgiving death. A crowd gathered around the shark's motionless body, its large mouth gaping wide open. It had been a tragic end for both man and beast. Local officials said they were going to conduct a post-mortem and an investigation on the shark to try to understand why this incident happened. So often with shark attacks, a shark will take one bite before realizing it had made a mistake and swims away. It is less common for them to come back again and again. Authorities banned anyone from entering the water on the beach and several others that were nearby. Almost 50 miles of coastline were closed to the public for the following 3 days. Swimming, snorkeling, and kayaking were prohibited until it was deemed safe again. Shark attacks in the Red Sea coastal resorts are considered rare. However, in 2022, there were 2 fatal attacks near Hurghada City, where Vladimir was killed. The resorts are popular, especially with European tourists. They offer excellent swimming and diving opportunities. But when attacks like this happen, people doubt the safety of the waters. It will take time for the tourism industry to recover, but in time, people will forget until it happens again. Todd Michael Endris was a surfer with a larger-than-life character. He was somebody that people instantly fell in love with when they first met him. He lit up every room he walked into. He was the life and soul of the party, but he was known for something else too, something that happened to him when he was 24 years old. On August 28, 2007, he headed out into the surf from Marina State Park Beach, Monterey Bay, California. He joined the other surfers in the water. The waves were breaking at a depth of just 6 feet. The Californian beach is protected. Its huge rugged sand dunes give way to the pristine sands and breakers beyond. It's popular with hang gliders who launch themselves from the top of the dunes and are carried out above the ocean. It's also a popular location for surfers. The surf is reliable and offers some large swells when the conditions are right. Todd loved the ocean. He had his own business servicing aquariums. He was fascinated by marine wildlife. He didn't just love surfing, he loved the environment in which he surfed. He was grateful that he was able to spend his free time in the water amongst friends. On this particular day, after 45 minutes in the water, Todd sat on his board, looking out towards the open sea. He was waiting to catch his next wave, waiting for the next ride. Little did he know it could be his last. From out of nowhere, a 15-foot great white launched up and out of the water. Todd caught a glimpse of it just before it knocked him off his board. He was sent crashing into the ocean, the water engulfing him. It was as though he had been hit by a bus. The force was immense as he was catapulted off his board. He tried to pull himself back onto his board, but the shark was too fast. In a second, it had swum back around and come at the surfer once more. As Todd kicked helplessly at the surface, the shark opened its jaws and clamped them down and around his torso. Todd was sandwiched in the shark's mouth between its serrated teeth and his own surfboard. Whilst the upper jaw of the shark tore the skin from Todd's back, described by the man himself as peeling him like a banana, the surfboard protected his underside. Luckily, the shark wasn't able to rip into his stomach and intestines as the surfboard was in the way. In a moment of terror, Todd turned to see the shark's powerful jaws latched around him. He could feel the sharp teeth tearing into his flesh as it held him in a vice-like grip. In another moment, he was dragged beneath the surface. The shark thrashed its head from side to side, shaking Todd violently. He felt the full force of the predator. It let go briefly, but came back a third time. This time, it clamped its mouth around Todd's right leg. Holding it firmly in its jaws gave Todd more stability in which to kick it madly with his left leg. As the water bubbled and boiled around Todd, he didn't believe he was going to die. He held on to a strong belief that he would make it, but he didn't know how. He prayed for divine intervention, and his prayers were answered in the most striking of ways. As the shark released its grip on Todd once more, it circled to come back around. But this time, when it came in for the kill, it was blocked by another marine animal. As Todd lay floating at the surface, blood pouring from an enormous gaping wound on his back, a pod of dolphins circled him. In an unexplained moment of true altruism, the dolphins formed a wall around the injured surfer. His prayers had been answered. Some jumped and splashed out of the water. He could see the dolphins surrounding him, their fins breaking through the surface of the water, protecting him, keeping him from harm. His friends rushed to his aid, whilst the dolphins fended off the shark. They pulled Todd towards the shore. He was bleeding profusely. The life was pouring from his limp body. There was no time to waste. He wasn't going to make it. They weren't going to get him to shore in time. Then, a divine power seemed to intervene once more. A huge wave surged behind the surfers and the board on which Todd lay. It pushed them forwards, propelling them toward the shore. In no time, they made it to the shallows and pulled Todd onto dry land. As he slipped in and out of consciousness, the sand around him turned red. He was losing too much blood. The lifeguards at the scene warned Todd's friend, Brian Simpson, that Todd wasn't going to make it. There was just no way anyone could survive such horrendous injuries. When Brian looked down at Todd's injuries, he had to agree with the lifeguards, but he wasn't going to give up on his friend. He worked as an X-ray technician in a trauma unit and was used to seeing gruesome injuries, but this was about as bad as it got. Todd was ashen white by the time he made it to shore. Brian told Todd to slow down his breathing. He needed to remain calm. It was his best chance of slowing his blood loss. The emergency services were called and a medevac helicopter arrived. Todd was airlifted to Santa Clara Medical Center. By the time he arrived, he had lost half of his blood. His blood pressure was dangerously low. It was touch and go whether he would survive the ordeal. Before stitching Todd back up, surgeons apparently had to first figure out what went where, putting the pieces of the jigsaw back together. Todd said that his lungs were visible through the enormous gouge in his back and side. Surgeons closed his wounds with 500 stitches and 200 staples. It took him 6 weeks to regain the blood he had lost. Miraculously, Todd survived the shark attack. He became a local hero and was known locally as Shark Boy. He always had time for people, and whenever people asked him to show him his impressive scar, he would whip off his shirt, revealing a huge bite mark across his back and torso. He wore the scar proudly. He had been lucky to survive such a traumatic ordeal. Despite his narrow escape, Todd returned to the water. He lived to surf another day. But sadly, Todd's life was to hang in the balance once more. Less than 10 years later, 33-year-old Todd crashed his van. He lost control and careened off the road. His black and white pit bull managed to escape from the wreckage. The dog made its way to the main road, barking frantically at passing vehicles, but it would be 10 hours before a biker finally noticed the dog and stopped to investigate. Todd was rushed to the hospital once more. Tragically, after fighting for his life for 11 days in the hospital, he finally succumbed to his injuries and died in September 2016. The memorial that followed his death was attended by more than 100 people. Mourners lined the beach at Monterey Bay. The surfing community joined hands in unison 100 yards from shore, balancing on their surfboards, united as one, remembering one of their own. A minute's applause rang out across the water, a celebration of a life well lived, a final goodbye to their fallen friend, Shark Boy. White sharks, also known as great white sharks, are some of the most feared and awe-inspiring creatures in the world's oceans. These massive predators can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 5,000 pounds, with razor-sharp teeth and incredible speed that make them the apex predator of the seas. But what makes white sharks truly fascinating is their hunting behavior. With a keen sense of smell and electroreception, they can detect their prey from miles away. Once they've honed in on a potential meal, they use their impressive speed and power to launch a surprise attack, often breaching out of the water to grab their victim. Despite their fearsome reputation, many people are drawn to these incredible animals, seeking out opportunities to witness them in their natural habitat. One such person was Heather Boswell. just 19 years old, working in the galley of a research ship that was exploring the depths of the ocean. Heather Boswell was living the dream, spending a 6-month term with the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration aboard the ship Discoverer. Her job might not have been the most glamorous, but it gave her a chance to be a part of something bigger, to witness the wonders of the sea firsthand. Little did she know that her journey would take a terrifying turn when a great white shark would come crashing into her life, changing it forever. March 23, 1994 was a seemingly ordinary day on the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration research ship Discoverer as it cruised through the Pacific Ocean around 300 miles east of Easter Island. But little did the crew know that a terrifying encounter with one of the ocean's most fearsome creatures was about to take place. As 9 members of the crew took a break from their duties to go for a refreshing open ocean swim, 3 of their colleagues monitored them from a rigid inflatable boat, scanning the waters for any signs of danger. Meanwhile, another crew member kept a watchful eye from aboard the ship. The sun beat down on the calm turquoise waters as the crew frolicked in the waves, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just beneath the surface. Most of the swimmers had been in the water for over an hour, with Heather Boswell having spent about 45 minutes enjoying the cool embrace of the ocean. It was then that disaster struck, in the form of a massive great white shark that suddenly appeared on the scene. At first, the crew thought it was all a joke when someone yelled out, "Shark!" But as the enormity of the situation became apparent, panic set in, and fear spread through the swimmers like wildfire. Meanwhile, on the boat, the monitor heard a second warning cry out across the water. "I'm not kidding, there's a shark." The shark was now closing in on Heather Boswell, who was blissfully unaware of the danger that was lurking just 25 feet away from her. The crew on the boat watched in horror as the great white approached Boswell, ready to strike at any moment. As the crew of the Discoverer scrambled to safety, Boswell found herself in a nightmare beyond her wildest imaginings. She had heard the second call for the shark, and she knew what was about to happen, but nothing could have prepared her for the horror that was about to unfold. The boat crew had picked up several swimmers and had watched in horror as the great white submerged and then resurfaced, grabbing Boswell by the ankle. Desperately, a member of the crew reached out with a stick, hoping to save her from the jaws of the predator, but it was too late. The shark had already clamped down on her leg, pulling her underwater and shaking her with ferocious force. Boswell later recalled that the shark was chewing on her leg, tearing at her flesh with razor-sharp teeth. Despite the pain and terror, Boswell managed to fight her way to the surface, gasping for air as the shark continued to circle her. The boat crew reached out with a broom handle, hoping to pull her to safety, but the shark was not finished yet. In a split second, it struck again, grabbing her left leg and pulling her back underwater. Once again, the predator shook her with all its might, thrashing her back and forth like a rag doll. Finally, with incredible bravery and strength, Boswell managed to break free from the shark's grip and make it back to the surface. The boat crew grabbed her arms and tried to pull her to safety, but the shark refused to let go. In a game of tug-of-war between man and beast, the crew struggled to save Boswell's life. But it was too late. Boswell later said that she heard a sickening pop as the shark's jaws tightened around her leg, crushing bone and tearing flesh. It was a moment of heartbreak and horror that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The unimaginable horror didn't end there. Boswell desperately hoped that the popping sound she heard was just her leg dislocating, but when she looked down, her worst fear was realized. Her left leg was gone, bitten off by the monstrous great white shark. Meanwhile, a warning about a shark attack had been blared over the ship's PA system, and chaos ensued. Amidst the commotion, a crew member cleaning his pistol heard the announcement and immediately rushed to the scene. As he arrived, he saw the shark swimming towards a crew member climbing a ladder and immediately fired several rounds in an attempt to save them. Miraculously, the shark veered away and swam around the stern of the ship. But the man didn't stop there. He followed the predator, unaware that all the crew members were already out of the water. He fired 2 more shots at the shark's head, killing it. The entire situation was nothing short of a heart-stopping thriller, with Boswell's struggle for survival and the crew's heroics culminating in a dramatic showdown with the killer shark. Meanwhile, Boswell, who had been in the inflatable boat monitoring the swimmers, was hoisted onto the ship. It was then that the true extent of her injuries became apparent. Many people mistakenly believe that once a person is out of the water, they are safe. However, the reality is that survival often depends on the actions taken after the attack. The shark attack had left Boswell with severe injuries. The medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize Boswell, who had lost a substantial amount of blood and was unresponsive. As they began preparing her for medical evacuation, her fragile state caused her blood pressure to drop to an alarming level, and the medical team had to perform CPR to keep her alive. The whole situation was heart-wrenching, and Boswell's condition was precarious, to say the least. But thanks to the quick thinking and dedication of the medical team and crew on the ship, Boswell slowly stabilized, and she was eventually transported to safety. The brave rescuers who risked their own lives to save Boswell were hailed as heroes and received well-deserved awards and recognition for their quick and decisive actions. Thanks to their heroic efforts, Boswell was able to receive the necessary medical treatment and was eventually flown to Seattle for further care. Heather Boswell's shark attack was a harrowing and traumatic experience that left her with life-changing injuries. However, the quick thinking and actions of the crew aboard the Discoverer and the medical team that treated her played a crucial role in saving her life. Their bravery and dedication to helping Boswell in her time of need cannot be overstated. Despite the physical and emotional scars that she undoubtedly carries, Boswell's survival and resilience are a testament to the human spirit and the power of hope in the face of adversity. It's January 31st, 2011. 39-year-old Nicole Moore is enjoying her day at the beach. She's on vacation in Cancun with friends from her exercise group from back home in Orangeville, Ontario, and nothing is better than the tropical weather for these fitness-loving people. After an intense game of volleyball on the beach, Nicole's friends decide to head back to the hotel for some lunch, but she tells them to go ahead without her. She'd much rather take a little swim to refresh her spirit and wash the stubborn, soft sand off her skin. She doesn't know it yet, but this choice is going to change her life forever, put her beliefs to test, and terrify anyone who hears this story. Cancun is one of Mexico's most popular resort areas, and for good reason. Located on the Caribbean Sea, the city teems with life. Hotels, nightclubs, and malls coexist with colorful open-air markets and family restaurants, but nothing quite compares with the white, cool sand beaches. Nicole Moore had no reason to be tense as she entered the water that afternoon. If anything, she was happy about her vacation, her body buzzing with the memory of the recently ended volleyball match. Nicole didn't even swim that far from the shore. In fact, she was in waist-deep water, trying to scrub off some of the sand that got stuck to her body during the match. She had no idea her movements were stirring up something from underneath the waves. She also had no idea that 2 sharks had been spotted at a nearby resort and that employees on jet skis had managed to get only one of the creatures to steer away from the tourists. So when Nicole looked up from the water, she saw 2 people on jet skis. The woman naturally assumed they were other carefree beach enthusiasts. They were waving their arms and talking to her in Spanish from afar. She had no idea what they were saying and just assumed they were being friendly. Nicole smiled and waved back at the 2 people and then went back to enjoying her little swim. But then those 2 yelled again, and Nicole had the sinking feeling something was about to go terribly wrong. Then something cold and slimy bumped into her body, and the 39-year-old was gripped by true dread. For a split second, she dared hope it was just a little kid who was snorkeling and who she simply hadn't seen. Then realization. Horrible realization. The massive mouth opened and clamped down on her left thigh. The teeth were so sharp it was like they were tearing through butter. Nicole looked down and saw the water instantly turn red with her own blood. It was strange. She couldn't feel the pain, but the gruesome sight was enough to tell the woman she was in deep trouble. Adrenaline causes a profound physical response, due to which endorphins that act like natural painkillers are released. So it's quite natural that Nicole didn't feel the extent of her injuries, even though the barbed teeth tore through the flesh down to the bone and ripped out 2 of her quadriceps and 2 hamstrings. The shark's bite yanked away more than a foot of Nicole's skin and flesh. The woman was desperate to get out of the water. Her mind was filled with images of her young daughters Tia and Ella. They were only 6 and 7 years old, too young to experience the trauma of losing their mother. Nicole Moore chose to fight. Her left leg was rendered useless by the horrible bite. She couldn't move it at all, nor stand on it, so she had to make good use of her arms. The mother of 2 started using her arms to propel herself to shore, but the movements were imprecise and slowed down by her wounded leg's inertia. Nicole struggled to advance through the bloody waves. In the meantime, the fearsome shark was circling her, leaving no room for interpretation. It wanted a second taste. The beast lunged in an instant, clenching Nicole's left arm in its jaws. The needle-like teeth held tight. The shark had the woman's entire arm locked in its mouth. Nicole felt an incredible amount of pressure as the shark tried to pull her underwater, but seeing those teeth layered and serrated gave the woman another wave of strength. She chose to defy fear and maybe death and raised her right hand. She started hitting the creature erratically until she somehow managed to smash her open hand down on the shark's nose. That one punch saved her. Although it's widely agreed that the shark's most sensitive areas are its eyes and its gills, a well-placed hit on a shark's nose could potentially make the animal let go. And that's how this particular shark reacted. It let go of Nicole's badly wounded left arm and swam away. But the horror was far from being over for the woman. She now had to somehow get herself to the shore, despite the huge amount of blood she'd lost and the dreadful injuries both her upper and lower limbs had suffered. Her left arm was hanging precariously. Her left leg had a gaping hole in it and was essentially incapable of motion. You didn't have to be an expert to realize the situation was dire, but Nicole was, in fact, a nurse, and she knew her wounds were serious enough to be considered potentially fatal. She felt fainter by the second, and there was a great risk of her losing consciousness and simply drowning after putting up the fight of her life. But as it happens, Nicole wasn't entirely alone. In the end, it was humankind's innate desire to help another person in need that helped her. One of the people that had previously tried to alert her about the approaching shark rushed to her aid before she could disappear beneath the still bloodied waves. The man grabbed Nicole's right arm, gunning the jet ski and towing the woman to the shore. A trail of crimson blood was left in the water. Being back on the shore came as a small relief to Nicole. She was feeling weaker and weaker. People gathered around her. She could hear panicked voices talking in Spanish and English, but nothing was more present than her own thoughts. As a nurse, she had to do what she knew best. She took medical inventory of herself and finally asked the surrounding crowd for help. She couldn't go just yet. She had a loving husband and 2 amazing children, and she wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily, although it was getting harder to breathe. As a medical professional, the woman understood that losing so much blood caused respiratory distress, and every time her heart beat, blood squirted into the air. By the time Nicole arrived at the hospital, she had lost 60% of her blood. Her vital organs were shutting down, and she had lost consciousness. She was rushed into an 8-hour operation in a desperate attempt to save her life. The medical team had to insert a central line directly into the woman's heart and pump unit after unit of blood to make sure it didn't stop working. When Nicole woke up in the hospital, her father Alberto and her husband Jay were there. Even more, someone had found the missing piece of her left leg and brought it to the hospital, where it was reattached. But her suffering was far from its end. 6 days after the attack, Nicole was flown from Mexico to Toronto. Her father and her husband had struggled to find a hospital bed back home in Canada, but they finally managed to find a team who wanted to see Nicole through her ordeal. The new doctors were astonished to find teeth marks on Nicole's bones. But what really got them was that the woman's previous operations had been done carelessly. There was decay in her flesh, seawater and sand mixed with the bandaging. Her thigh had been reattached incorrectly, It wasn't getting any blood, so it was rotting away little by little. Multiple tissue transplants were required in order to cover Nicole's bone in flesh again, and her arm ultimately had to be amputated. But the attack never broke Nicole's spirit. She decided to stay and fight for her life and children. She overcame every obstacle, every bout of pain. She chose not to hate the shark. After all, it was her who had been trespassing in its natural habitat. Although shark attacks are incredibly rare in Cancun, in fact, there had been only 40 shark attacks in the whole of Mexico in the past 450 years. 11 months after her accident, Nicole returned to Cancun and even swam in the same waters in which she had nearly met her end. She has since become a motivational speaker, a shark conservationist, and a Shark Week beloved guest. It was January 5th, 2023, and Manuel Lopez was in his boat, ready to dive into endless waters and search for axe stripes, a highly demanded type of mollusks. Lopez was in his 50s and a very experienced diver and fisherman. The man had been a fisherman for as long as he could remember. He relied heavily on fishing to make ends meet, but now his source of income was being threatened. The waters were more dangerous than usual. Sharks migrate to the area to feed in December and January. Mexican divers had been warned about the presence of sharks in the area for days. Many of them had spotted the creatures themselves. The area was teeming with sharks, all of them hungry and on the lookout for food. Because of this, most fishermen had been on high alert and had decided to wait the migration out, but not everybody afforded the luxury of preserving their own life. While the Mexican government offers a stipend of 7,200 pesos, roughly $400 per year, to supplement fishermen's income, the sum is not enough to make ends meet. Financial pressures meant Manuel Lopez had to make an extremely difficult choice: keep diving or risk poverty. Lopez chose the former one, despite the huge dangers it implied. He knew that he had a chance of making some really good money. There was a shortage of seafood in the area, which in turn had created a great demand. The man needed to capitalize on this demand at a time when very few others would risk facing the sea. So on the morning of January 5th, 2023, Lopez went out on his boat. He wanted to scuba dive in order to collect axe tripe, a mollusk like a scallop. These mollusks are usually at a depth of 36 to 59 feet. Pulling them out of the ocean floor can be quite risky. The turbulence can spark the interest of nearby sharks, but Manuel Lopez was willing to take this risk too. After all, he wasn't completely alone. Sure, he was the only one who planned to enter the water, but there were two tenders on board the boat. At about 11:30 that morning, Lopez dived deep beneath the surface of the water, never to return again. The Gulf of California, also known as the Sea of Cortez, separates the Baja California Peninsula from the Mexican mainland. It has a surface of 62,000 square miles, and maximum depths exceed 9,800 feet. In other words, there's plenty of room for all kinds of marine creatures to lurk, and some of them are far more dangerous than others. The Gulf's rich ecosystem is home to many, many animals. It also hosts a large number of migratory species, such as the humpback whales, the manta ray, the leatherback sea turtle, and, of course, sharks. Manuel Lopez was interested in only one of the numerous species that have their natural habitat in the Gulf of California. The man knew he'd find the precious axe tripes deep down, buried in the ocean floor. The two tenders, Lopez's co-workers, watched as the man dived deeper and deeper. Soon enough, he reached the ocean floor and started pulling axe tripes. And then something horrible happened. A terrifying huge shark emerged out of nowhere. The two tenders watched in shock as the huge creature opened its jaws and with a swift motion decapitated Manuel Lopez and bit both of his shoulders. It all happened so quickly, it was almost impossible. One moment, Lopez was there, looking for axe tripes and more than alive. The next, he was gone, torn to pieces by a terrifying creature. Horrified, the two tenders rushed toward the shore and alerted authorities. Lopez's death was instantaneous, which brought them some kind of solace, but the trauma was still huge. Theories about how and why the attack happened started pouring in almost immediately. Everyone had an opinion, from fishermen to marine experts. Some scientists came forward and suggested the attack could have been prevented. According to them, it was all about the diving suit. Mexican authorities had previously advised divers to wear brightly colored wetsuits in order to stand out from seals. Because of the migration, pregnant female sharks often enter the Gulf's waters looking for fatty seals, which are often the preferred prey of hungry sharks. Some experts suggested the shark responsible for the attack might have mistaken Manuel Lopez for a seal because the man's suit was black. Other experts were unconvinced by these claims, stating that this kind of theory is hard to prove. Why? Because most wetsuits are black, or dark blue anyway, and there's no way to tell statistically whether they are the common denominator in shark attacks. However, many scientists agree the divers' fishing activity was most likely the cause of the attack. According to Chris Lowe, the director of the Shark Lab at California State University, Long Beach, the smell of the shellfish concentrated around the diver could have lured the shark to the area. This might have happened because sharks have extraordinarily developed olfactory senses, hence one of their nicknames, swimming noses. Sharks can easily detect smells in the water. To top it off, they can feel the vibrations caused by struggling animals. But there are other theories that might be true. The man's position on the ocean floor could have made him look like a foraging sea lion, which are also a favorite prey to sharks. There were other mysteries concerning the attack. Why did the shark bite the man's head and shoulders? Sharks usually go for the limbs. Once again, experts suggested Lopez's position on the seafloor might have provoked the unusual manner of the attack. Because the man was essentially walking along the bottom, the shark couldn't have approached him from underneath. Approaching prey from the side would have most likely exposed the shark to a counterattack, so biting the man's head was probably the shark's only viable option. Or maybe the creature went for the head for another, far simpler reason. Maybe the shark deliberately went for the head, intent on quickly incapacitating its victim. Despite all the theories, scientists argued that knowing the whole truth and the animal's reasoning was highly unlikely. Sadly, these attacks can happen, but there are safety measures that can potentially save a life. According to National Geographic, most shark attacks aren't fatal. Because they are curious by nature, sharks often bite humans just to figure out what they are. After these so-called sample bites, sharks usually release humans. These fierce animals don't have great eyesight, so they sometimes mistake humans for other mammals. That's when fatal attacks most likely occur. There are some safety measures you can take in order to avoid a shark attack. Avoid swimming at dusk or dawn, since this is feeding time for sharks, and also their eyesight is even worse than usual. Avoid estuaries, since the murky waters can provide a perfect hiding point for sharks. Avoid areas with fishing, because the smells and the vibrations can and will attract sharks. Don't wear shiny objects while swimming, because sharks can mistake shiny jewelry for fish. Don't panic if you encounter a shark, and maintain eye contact.
Simon Nellist was a nature lover by heart. He fell in love with Australia and the beautiful surrounding ocean when he was traveling there 6 or 7 years ago. He lived with his fiancée in Wally Creek, South Sydney. Tragically, their wedding was postponed due to the coronavirus pandemic. Their wedding was only weeks away. They never had a chance to get married. Simon enjoyed swimming after work and often went for a swim in the warm waters between Little Bay and Malabar, East Sydney. Originally from Penzance in Cornwall, UK, Simon had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the British Royal Air Force. He kept fit and had entered the Malabar Magic Ocean Swim, for which he had been training on that fatal day. The state of New South Wales extensively protects its beaches, including where Simon was attacked, from sharks. They deploy many different deterrents to protect the swimmers and surfers who frequent the beaches. Their shark mitigation program is thought to be the largest and most sophisticated in the world. Shark nets have been installed for nearly a century. An extensive shark tagging program is in operation. Sharks caught in the nets, particularly the more dangerous species such as great whites, tiger sharks, and bull sharks, are tagged with a tracker and relocated over a kilometer away. During busy summer weekends, when the beaches are at their most busy, drones and helicopters hover over the water, scanning for sharks. Shark sirens are sounded by lifeguards if a shark is spotted, and people are ordered to leave the water. If dangerous sharks have posed a risk to the public, baited drum lines are used to try and capture it. In over a century, fatal shark attacks in Australia are recorded as less than one per year. The safety measures the authorities take in order to keep people safe appear to be working. However, this is something that many people feel strongly about. Ironically, Simon was very outspoken about the cruelty of shark nets and drum lines. In one of his final Facebook posts, he stated, "Shark nets and drum lines protect no one and kill all kinds of marine life each year." Simon was 35 years old and was at one with the marine environment. Everything about Simon was connected to the ocean in one way or another. He was a diving instructor and a member of Sydney's Scuba Diving Social Club. He was a calm and patient instructor and was frequently telling his dive students to respect the ocean. He knew the risks associated with swimming in Sydney's waters, but his passion for adventure and the outdoors were what he lived for. Wednesday, 16 February 2022. Simon was swimming his usual training route near Little Bay. This bay is a short distance south of Malabar Beach, where he was hoping to compete in a charity fundraising swim the following weekend. Little Bay is a beautiful hidden gem south of Sydney Harbor. The sea is calm, with clear waters, and the golden sandy beach is sheltered from winds. It offers idyllic swimming conditions. Simon donned his wetsuit and entered the water. There were fishermen on the rocks, and others were swimming or paddling in the sea. At 4:30 p.m., and less than 150 meters from the shore, an enormous great white shark swam up from the depths. In a vertical attack, it exploded out of the water underneath Simon. It grabbed him in its jaws. In a desperate attempt, Simon screamed out for help and dramatically tried fighting the shark off. The shark was reported to have been more than 3 meters long. An eyewitness described the enormous splash like a car hitting the ocean. Adult great white sharks mostly hunt marine mammals such as seals and sea lions. They are incredibly strong animals, weighing up to a ton. Sharks have an excellent sense of smell and can detect electrical signals produced by marine animals. They are ambush predators, relying on the element of surprise to catch their prey. Typically, a great white shark will position itself below a seal or sea lion. It will then torpedo upwards, reaching speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. The sheer force of the shark's strike can knock its prey clean out of the water before its serrated teeth, up to 2 inches long, bite down. Horrifyingly, the shark bit down, tearing Simon's body in two. Shocked onlookers could do nothing but watch as Simon was killed within feet of the rocks of Buchan Point. His body was then dragged out to sea, and he was never seen again. One of the dozens of fishermen on the rocks at the time of the attack described the devastating scene. "I heard a scream, and the shark was just chomping on his body, and the body was in half just off the rocks here. It came back and swallowed parts of his body, and that was it. It disappeared." This desperately sad attack was vicious and frenzied. Locals who knew Simon and often greeted him as he took his daily swims said that it was unusual for swimmers in the area to wear wetsuits. The water was warm, and most bathers did not wear them. Experts have suggested that Simon, in his black wetsuit, was mistaken for a seal. From below the water's surface, a silhouetted swimmer above in a wetsuit could easily look similar to a seal or sea lion. It is thought that due to the nature of a great white shark's hunting method, most attacks are because of mistaken identity. The sharks can sense a mammal swimming above them, but cannot clearly see the type of animal it is. Their speed and precision make it difficult for them to stop midway through an attack. Often, sharks who attack people will swim away after the first bite as soon as they realize that this isn't their normal prey. Immediately after the terrifying attack on Simon, the Coast Guard and lifeguards patrolled the area in boats and on jet skis to try and find the shark. Smart drum lines were deployed in the location too. These drum lines are long lines with baited hooks. When the bait is taken by a shark, it triggers a magnet which, in turn, sends an alert via a solar-powered beacon to officials on shore. This gives advanced warning of a shark in the area. After fatal shark attacks, people often begin discussing culling sharks, but they are such an important marine species that a decline in their numbers could be devastating for the marine environment and subsequently humans. They are apex predators and therefore maintain the balance within the food chain. Areas where sharks are in decline have seen reductions in coral reefs, seagrass beds, and the loss of commercial fisheries. Each of these habitats is vital to a whole host of other species, not least the survival of human beings. Simon's family and friends have been left shocked and heartbroken by this attack. It was the first fatal attack in Australia in almost 60 years. It's devastating that someone who was so outspoken and passionate about the marine environment was killed far too young by a species he was trying to conserve. How to be shark safe. Number 1. Don't swim or surf at night or at dawn or dusk. This is when sharks are most active. They are also more likely to misidentify you for prey when visibility is poor. Number 2. Don't swim alone. Sharks are more likely to attack a lone swimmer than those in a group. Again, mistaken identity could be the cause of this. A group of swimmers is less likely to look like a seal or sea lion. Number 3. If you have an open cut or wound, do not go in the water. Sharks are well renowned for their incredible sense of smell. Some species of shark have a quarter of their brains dedicated to smell and can smell a drop of blood in the ocean from 3 miles away. Number 4. Remove jewelry before swimming in the ocean. Glinting rings or watches could be mistaken for fish scales and could attract a shark. Number 5. Stay away from fishing areas. Fishermen using bait and chum attract sharks. Also, areas where sewage or rivers enter the sea attract bait fish, which in turn attract sharks. Number 6. Excessive splashing either by people or by dogs can attract sharks and can confuse them into thinking that you or your pet are prey. Number 7. Steer clear of areas where sharks like to hang out. These include the borders between reefs or sandbars and the open ocean.
It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in 2014. 3 friends, Cliff Zimmerman, Red Bartley, and Randy Fry, met for lunch at Kareen's Fish Grotto in the center of town at Fort Bragg. Situated along California's coastline in Mendocino County, the 3 men were eager fishermen and decided to head out for the afternoon on Cliff's boat. By mid-afternoon, they decided to try a spot of abalone diving. Cliff turned the boat back to shore and motored into a sheltered cove at Kaipsilla Rock. Sea lions swam around the boat. Some were lying, sunning themselves on the large semi-submerged rocks. They were 150 feet from shore, and the depth gauge read 15 feet. Although it was a popular fishing spot, the little cove was only accessible by boat. The steep, jagged cliffs cast a dark shadow over the water. No one else was about. They had the cove all to themselves. Once there, the men dropped the anchor by a large boulder. Cliff and Randy pulled on their wetsuits, dive masks, and fins. It was around 4 p.m. on the 15th of August 2014 when Randy and Cliff entered the water on what was to be their last dive together. They had been friends for more than 30 years. Having met in the construction industry in Sacramento during the 1970s, the 2 men discovered they had a mutual interest in ocean diving. Randy spent all his spare time on the water, whether that was for sport fishing or diving for abalone. Randy and Cliff hit it off and became great friends, often traveling to the coast together for their diving adventures, sitting on the beach after their dives, drinking beer, and talking until the sun went down. Randy had been described as someone who lived his life carefree. Later in life, he made a career as a lobbyist for the Recreational Fishing Alliance. Fishing and diving were his passions. He loved the sea so much that he had often said to Cliff that if he had to go, then he would want it to be in the water. Unfortunately for Randy, that wish was about to come true as, at 50 years old, he met his premature end. With sea lions in the area, Cliff and Randy spoke to Red about sharks. He was told to keep lookout from the boat. If he was to see sea lions acting erratically or anxiously, then he must let them know straight away. Red was a bit worried when he heard this, but his friends assured him that they had been diving together for more than 30 years in these waters, and nothing was going to happen. Red maintained a lookout as his two friends floated on the surface of the water just yards from the boat. He watched as Randy and Cliff gulped in a lungful of air and submerged below the surface. They scoured the ocean floor for the marine mollusk abalone, looking for the characteristic oval-shaped shells clinging to the rocks. Situated just 170 miles north of San Francisco, the water off Fort Bragg was frequented by sharks. Northern California has a healthy great white shark population. Conservationists and marine biologists estimate there is a growing number of around 300 individuals, signaling a healthy marine ecosystem off the West Coast. Randy, Cliff, and Red knew that sharks frequented the area, but it didn't deter them from diving. They had been in the water with sharks before, and they had never shown any interest in the divers. It irritated Randy when people warned of the dangers of sharks. He knew the odds of being killed on the way to the beach were hundreds of times greater than actually being taken by a shark. In fact, the odds were so long that only 9 people had been killed by great whites off the Californian coast since records began. But those odds were about to catch up to Randy. Swimming in just 15 feet of water, the two friends could see the bottom of the sea below them as they dived down repeatedly, resurfacing frequently for air. They moved towards the kelp beds, where the long strands of seaweed reached for the surface, swaying with the motion of the sea, a forest of brown and dark green. The two of them floated on the surface. Then Randy said to Cliff, "I've got to get a couple of abs. Where are they?" To which Cliff replied, "They're right below me." Randy took a deep gulp of air and dived down, straight into the path of an incoming predator. Cliff sunk his face underwater and watched his friend. The two of them were just 3 feet apart when Cliff noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Immediately, he thought that it was a boat zooming overhead at tremendous speed. But then he felt the water move around him. He saw a flash of dark gray and an enormous shark fin slice through the water between him and his dive buddy. It was like a submarine coming out of nowhere, barreling in between the two of them. Cliff couldn't believe the size of it, as he estimated it to be around 18 feet long and built like a pickup truck. With such speed and power, the two men didn't have time to react. It swooped past Cliff, its eyes fixated on his friend, not much more than an arm's length away. Cliff felt the rough sandpapery skin brush him as it torpedoed past. Time seemed to stand still. His heart thumped hard at the realization of what this enormous gray body was. His eyes opened wide, and within a second, the great white shark had powered into the unsuspecting Randy. He may not have even seen it, as he was looking down at the seafloor at the time. He would have felt an immense smack from behind him, like being hit by a truck. As quickly as it appeared, it closed its powerful jaws around Randy's neck, thrashed its head from side to side, and yanked Randy's head clean off from his body. Cliff screamed underwater as the nightmare unfolded right before his eyes. Cliff was terrified that the shark would turn on him. He didn't dare look back. He didn't dare dip his mask below the surface to see if it was coming for him. Instead, he swam as hard as he could toward the boat. He headed for the little platform at the stern of the boat and yelled at Reb to grab him and pull him as hard as he could. He didn't want to be the guy who nearly made it. Red grabbed him and hauled him on board. Cliff lay on the floor of the boat for a few seconds, gasping for air, panting hard, completely shocked by what he had seen. Then he and Red peered back over the side of the boat. It was evident from the amount of blood surrounding the scene of the attack that their friend Randy was gone. Red then grabbed the radio. He squeezed the button and relayed his distress mayday message to the Coast Guard. Within minutes, 3 helicopters were hovering above the cove, and the Coast Guard boat was motoring to the scene. A search for Randy's body began. Their friend was dead within seconds. There was no chance of survival, and the two friends knew it, but they needed to find his body. It wasn't until the next day that Randy's body was recovered from the water. The shark hadn't eaten him. It had likely mistaken him for a seal and swam away after making the fatal blow. Randy's head washed ashore 3 weeks later, discovered by a beachcomber. It was a gruesome and terrifying incident which left his friends and family devastated and shocked. His death was incredibly quick, and he likely had no idea what was happening when the shark struck him. Randy was cremated, and a memorial service was held on board 2 fishing boats. Out in the sea, the place where Randy felt most comfortable, his ashes were scattered. His final resting place. Receiving more sunshine than anywhere else in the world, Perth is ideal for visitors and locals alike. The bustling city is just a stone's throw away from the golden sandy beaches, marine wildlife, and wineries along Australia's western coastline. Swimming, snorkeling, diving, and surfing are popular water sports around Perth, activities that attract people near and far. One resident of Perth was 57-year-old Paul Millachip, originally from the UK. He was an incredibly fit man. He had competed in 6 Ironman competitions, grueling triathlons which involve a 2.4-mile swim, followed by a 112-mile bike ride, and a marathon run to finish with. He and his wife regularly ran, cycled, and swam along Perth's coast. They ventured down to the water 2 or 3 times every week, the Australian weather enabling an outdoor lifestyle that they loved. They had been in Australia for many years. As British expats, they had built a life for themselves there and had become part of the community. On Saturday, the 6th of November, Paul planned on swimming 1 kilometer that day. His wife joined him in the water, but got out soon afterwards. It was too cold for her. She decided to get changed and wait for Paul on the beach. She looked out over the water. There were surfers and other swimmers. Along the coastline, a predator was on the prowl. A tigershark, 3 meters long, scoured the shoreline for its next meal, drawn closer to the shore by the warmer waters and its prey. But this was an opportunistic hunter, capable of taking down dolphins, seals, and sea lions. It homed in on Paul, spotting his silhouetted figure on the surface above it. Once it had decided to attack, there was no stopping it. It was pure instinct. Millions of years of evolution converged to create an impressive predator, one of the most feared of its kind. Paul probably didn't see it coming. He was unprepared and unaware of what was about to happen in a few seconds' time. It came at him from the depth, approaching him from underneath and behind, out of his field of vision. The speed and power of the attack most likely caused catastrophic injury to Paul. It would have felt like a bus hitting him, knocking the air from his lungs, disorienting him, before dragging him beneath the waves. The attack happened close to the dinghy. The 4 teenage boys watched in horror as an enormous shark arched out of the water, its dark gray skin reflecting the sunlight before submerging with Paul in its jaws. There was no scream from Paul, no thrashing about in the water. It was an instantaneous, lethal attack. When his wife emerged from the dressing room, she scoured the ocean for Paul. She couldn't see him. Instead, she saw the 4 frantic teenagers shouting from their dinghy. They were screaming about a shark attack, motoring up and down the shoreline, telling swimmers and surfers to get out of the water. People made a dash for the rock, scrambling to get out of the water. Panic spread across the beach. It was terrifying for the young Year 10 pupils. A surfer had shouted out about the attack, and the 4 teenagers pulled up their anchor and immediately motored toward Paul. They made it to within inches from him, just inches from the attack. They witnessed Paul being dragged under by the enormous shark just next to their boat. It could easily have been one of them. It could easily have knocked them from their small dinghy and attacked them. They saw the sheer size of the shark as its back arched out of the water. The distance between the dorsal fin and its tail was immense. After warning the other swimmers and surfers, one of the boys pulled out his mobile phone and called the emergency services. His wife hadn't seen the attack. She had only seen some splashing in the water as she came out of the changing rooms, and Paul had vanished. There was a helicopter on patrol at the time of Paul's attack, but it was not in the vicinity of Port Beach. The Westpac Lifesaver Rescue Helicopter was scouring the sea 80 kilometers away when the report came in about the shark attack. It immediately diverted to where Paul was last seen and began a search for him. In total, 5 water police and sea rescue boats and 2 helicopters were sent to scour the area. Lifeguards stationed at a nearby beach also rushed to Port Beach to help in the search, but it was too late. Paul was already gone. There was nothing anybody could do. 24 hours later, the search for Paul was called off. Only a pair of his goggles was ever recovered from the site. His wife had the agonizing job of phoning the family, who lived overseas, and informing them of the terrible events. He was a father to 2 grown-up children. She thanked the boys in the dinghy for their quick action. Although they couldn't save Paul, they may have saved other lives by warning others to get out of the water. Eyewitnesses helped piece together the attack, but it seemed that it came out of nowhere and happened so quickly that there wasn't anything anyone could do. It was the 3rd fatal shark attack to happen in Australian waters that year. The beach was closed for the rest of that weekend. It was cordoned off by officials, a sight that is becoming increasingly common across Australia. But on Monday morning, it reopened again. Nervously, some swimmers braved the water. The Port Beach Polar Bears are a local swimming group that have been swimming at the beach for decades. On that Monday morning, their numbers dwindled. Many of the group were understandably anxious about going in the water again and decided not to. Others, however, weren't deterred. They said that they know the risks. Sharks are always at the back of people's minds when they enter the water in Australia. But swimming is their passion, and they don't want to let the relatively uncommon shark attacks that occur in Australia each year put them off from doing something that they enjoy. Reports came in just days after the attack that Port Beach had been closed again. This time, a member of the public spotted a 3-meter shark circling the waters just 100 meters from shore. A surf life-saving helicopter was dispatched to patrol the area, but couldn't see anything. As for the 4 teenage boys who rushed to Paul's aid and warned others of the attack, they received bravery awards from the City of Fremantle and Civic Service Award medallions from the City of Melville. These awards recognize special service to the community. No doubt it took some time for the horror of what happened to sink in for the youngsters, but they were hailed as local heroes. Paul's wife was supported by officers. The only comfort she could take from the terrible and heart-wrenching tragedy was that her husband died doing what he loved. It began on the afternoon of Monday, the 3rd of July. On vacation with her family, a 15-year-old girl entered the water at Robert Moses Beach. She didn't know it at the time, but there was a predator lurking under the waves. As she paddled out into deeper water, a juvenile shark came closer. It was curious. The girl's body floated at the surface, her arms and legs dangling beneath her. The sunlight reflected off her skin. Typically, sharks determine what something is by taking a bite first. They get all their tactile information from mouthing the object. If it turns out to be something other than their typical prey, then they release their grip and swim away. That's what this young shark may have been doing. You could see the outline of the girl from beneath, the splashing on the surface of the water as she swam around. It sensed the vibrations of potential prey. The shark came in for an investigative bite. Opening its jaws at the last moment, it clamped down on her left leg. The girl gave a shriek and kicked furiously underwater. She could feel the sharp teeth dig into her calf, a vice-like grip around her lower leg. As the commotion unfolded, her struggles were spotted by a lifeguard who began blowing his whistle and running towards her. Seconds later, the shark released its grip and swam away. The girl swam to the shore, terrified of what had just happened. Blood oozed from the puncture wounds on her leg, and she sat down on the beach. When the lifeguard came to her aid, he immediately called for the beach to be closed. Although the girl didn't see what had bitten her, most believed this was a shark attack. Certainly a small shark, but nevertheless a shark attack all the same. The girl was taken to the hospital and went on to make a full recovery. No doubt she will think twice before entering the water again. But her incident was just the beginning. Another invisible attacker set its sights on the beachgoers. Just a few hours after the girl's attack at Robert Moses Beach, 15-year-old Peter Banculi was riding the waves on his surfboard 3 miles to the east. He was in the surf at Kismet Beach. Under the cover of the breakers, another marine animal made its approach. Peter's left foot was dangling in the water off the back of his board while he waited for a wave. All of a sudden, he felt something grab hold of it. He knew immediately what it was. He felt the weight of it tug his foot downwards, but he held onto his surfboard firmly, refusing to let go, refusing to be pulled underwater. Moments later, the animal released its grip and swam away. Peter never saw what it was. He never saw the telltale dorsal fin or the gray back as it arched out of the water, but he was certain it was a shark. He was lucky. He managed to paddle to shore with the power of the waves pushing behind him, pushing him towards safety. When he reached the beach, he could assess the damage he had sustained properly. He called out to his friend Joe, who came rushing over. He and a member of the public helped stem the bleeding until emergency services arrived on the scene. Although slightly shocked by the incident, the young surfer says that he is not deterred from going back in the water, and once he makes a full recovery, that's exactly where he'll be headed. That's if the beaches are kept open. Following the 2 attacks, lifeguards scoured the coastline for sharks. They were on high alert. They knew the holidays were bringing more and more people to the beaches, and it was their duty to keep them safe. Using a drone, they searched for any sharks that may be prowling the shores. As the drone soared over the water, they spotted something that sent shivers down the spine. A school of 50 sand sharks were swimming just meters from the beach, just feet from where people were swimming. As holidaymakers splashed about in the shallows, they were unaware of the imminent danger. Although not thought of as sociable animals, some sharks have been observed hunting in packs. Could this have been a shark pack on the hunt, drawn to the beaches by the commotion of thousands of holidaymakers? In response to this sighting, beaches were closed, and news of the shark sighting spread like wildfire. Some people refused to step foot in the water. Others were undeterred. Panic set in amongst the beachgoers. The announcement of the alleged pack of sharks was condemned by shark experts. They said that it definitely would not have been a school of sharks patrolling the area. That behavior is very atypical of the alleged species, and the footage of the dark shadows was very poor. After consulting with lifeguards and the New York State Parks Department, it was confirmed that the shadowy school had been misidentified. They were likely a school of smaller fish, perhaps a school of black drum. Although the ominous shadow detected by the drones wasn't what people first feared, knowing that it was a large school of prey fish meant that sharks could be nearby, enticed into the shallows. Although no sharks had been spotted in the incidents so far, there was no doubt about the fact that there were sharks in the area and holidaymakers were coming dangerously close to them. The following day, 3 more people were bitten just yards from the beaches. At Quoquay Village Beach, a public swimming beach in the town of Southampton, a 47-year-old entered the water. Schools of fish darted beneath the waves. Sharks were drawn in to just beyond the breakers. As the man waded out deeper and deeper, he had no idea that he was walking towards a predator. Moments later, in the chest-high water, he felt a sharp bite on his knee. Instantly, he kicked his leg and lashed out. He looked down but couldn't see anything in the water. He cried out in panic and rushed back to the shore. He could feel the pain growing in his leg as he made his way through the water to the shallows. He was taken to the hospital and treated for his injuries. No shark was sighted. As lifeguards were put on high alert, the mysterious bites kept coming. Minutes later, 60 miles away at Fire Island Pines, a 49-year-old who was swimming in the water felt a sharp tug on his hand. When he pulled his hand away, it was heavily lacerated and blood poured into the water. He too was taken to a nearby hospital and stitched up. That same day, a third attack occurred on a woman at Cherry Grove, located on Fire Island. Once more, beaches were closed, and the coastline scoured for any signs of the shark or sharks. Drones took to the skies, and lifeguards patrolled on jet skis. When no sharks were spotted, the beaches were reopened again with a warning to remain vigilant and close to shore. Had these bites been from sharks, or had they been from another fish? There are other predatory fish that live in coastal waters. But a couple of days after the 4th of July celebrations, the ominous shadow of a 10-foot shark was seen weaving its way along the coastline, 50 feet from the beach. In 2 days, there had been 5 shark attacks. It was a significant number. In the previous year, Long Island had seen 8 attacks throughout the entire year, so it looked as though 2023 may be on course to beat that number. George Gorman, a state of New York park director in Long Island, said that there was cause for concern. He said that officials are stepping up surveillance to keep people safe, but it is worrying about the rising number of shark attacks. The warmer waters could be drawing the sharks closer to shore. As people continue to enjoy the marine environment, they are inevitably going to come in contact with the species that live there. Maybe next time, though, they may not be so lucky. Heidi Ernst was an avid scuba diver. She was very experienced in the underwater world. It was a passion of hers, the most enjoyable hobby, and at 73 years old, she certainly wasn't slowing down. In fact, in May 2023, she completed her 500th scuba dive, a milestone that few ever reach. She certainly had an appetite for adventure. At her home in Iowa, she was a devoted owner to her miniature schnauzer called Billy and her horse called Sunny. She was very physically fit, working as a physical therapist for almost 4 decades. Impressively, she was also a powerlifter and exercise guru. In June 2023, just 1 month after her 500th scuba dive, she headed to the Bahamas, specifically Grand Bahama. Situated just 64 miles east of Florida's Palm Beach, the location is beautiful. Fringed by white flowery sands, palm trees, and turquoise blue waters, it's a stunning destination for holidaymakers. Not only that, but scuba diving in the Bahamas offers something for all diving abilities. Reef dives, shark dives, and wreck dives are popular across the islands and attract all manner of wildlife, least of all, sharks. It wasn't Heidi's first time in the Bahamas. She had been diving there for 11 years. The incredible marine wildlife and underwater photographic opportunities kept her coming back for more. On June 7th, Heidi boarded a 32-foot motorboat. The weather was warm and sunny. She wore her swimming costume and sat on the back of the boat, admiring the view as they motored toward the diving site, aptly named Shark Junction. The sea was relatively calm as they bounced along the waves. When they arrived at the location, the boat hovered over the dive site. Heidi pulled on her fins and dive gear. She rolled into the water and submerged in a cloud of bubbles. The brilliant blue of the ocean engulfed her. The beautiful marine wildlife spread across the reef below her. She swam downwards, watching the beautiful fish as they flitted and darted within the reef. She had her underwater camera with her, something she always did, capturing each adventure, each dive into the ocean. The dive had been a success. Heidi had seen what she came to see and headed for the surface. Looking up, she saw the silhouette of the boat above her. Gently, she glided upwards, kicking her fins back and forth, propelling herself closer to the boat. With her eyes fixed on the hull of the boat above her, Heidi failed to notice a shadow closing in. Below her, a tigershark had been watching its potential prey swimming away. Its eyes locked onto the 73-year-old as she held onto the swim ladder at the back of the boat. Heidi pulled herself up the rungs of the ladder, pulling her mask off her face and removing her regulator from her mouth. If she had known she was being pursued by a top predator, then she would have leapt out of the water. If she had known what was about to happen, then maybe she could have pulled herself out of the water in time. But just as she was handing the boatman her mask, she felt a heavy tug on one of her legs. The power of the tug almost pulled her backwards into the water. It felt like a truck had hit her. She immediately looked down and saw the terrifying head of an enormous tiger shark. Its jaws were clamped firmly around her lower leg. She felt the searing pain as it thrashed its head from side to side. The water splashed and foamed. She knew she was in real danger of being pulled into the water, pulled into the jaws of an awesome predator. She needed to fight back to stay alive, so she held on to the rung of the ladder with one hand, and with the other, she hit the shark as hard as she could, on its head and on its nose. As Heidi continued to hit the shark, it let go, blood pouring from her gaping wound into the water. One of the boat's crew shouted at her to get out of the water. She didn't hesitate. She pulled herself up the ladder and scrambled onto the boat. As she looked down at her leg, it was serious. She was losing a lot of blood. One of the crew on board, Fred Reiger, administered first aid. He tied a tourniquet around her leg. Heidi could feel her life slipping away. She thought she was going to die. She thought this was the end. She had recently lost her husband to cancer just 3 years before, and now her family was going to have to say goodbye to her. But Fred secured the tourniquet as tightly as possible. It seemed to be working. It slowed the flow of blood. The bottom of the boat was stained in red, which swirled around as the boat rocked from side to side. They motored full speed back to shore. The pain was excruciating as Heidi lay in the boat, hoping upon hope that she would make it. In the 11 years that Heidi had been diving, she had never felt threatened by any sharks she had come across. They had never shown any signs of aggression as Heidi snapped photos of them swimming around her. They were part of the marine environment, and she had swum with many of them before. She knew the dangers, and she knew how to behave around them. This attack had taken her completely by surprise. When the boat made it back to shore, Heidi was rushed to Rand Memorial Hospital in Grand Bahama's Freeport. Once she was there, she was stabilized before being airlifted to Jackson Ryder Trauma Center in Miami. She was conscious when she arrived and discussed her options with surgeons. They were limited. The wound on her calf was severe. The surgeons didn't know if they could save the leg, but they could try. If they were successful, then it could be a long, arduous road ahead of her with constant threat of infection and poor use of the limb. Heidi made the decision to have her leg amputated from the shin down. She would likely recover faster that way. It was a shock, but it seemed to be the right decision. In the days that followed Heidi's amputation, she received 6 or 7 blood transfusions and 6 surgeries. A specialist reconnected the nerves in her lower leg to her muscles with the hope of reducing pain and improving recovery. Heidi still has a long road ahead of her. She will likely need more procedures as she recovers, but for now, she is hopeful. A GoFundMe page was set up by Heidi's friend Kimberly Barnes to help cover her medical expenses and travel costs. Over a week after the attack, Heidi was still in the hospital in Miami. She hadn't been discharged and hadn't made it home to Iowa. When she eventually made it home, Heidi remained positive. She hasn't been deterred from diving and has been researching prosthetic diving fins for amputees. Her passion for marine wildlife is etched into her very being. She isn't going to give it up that easily. It all started just before 11 o'clock on the morning of December 1st. Sharm El Sheikh is a popular beach resort, particularly with Europeans. The city is a popular tourist destination because it's situated amongst excellent beaches and shallow seas with beautiful coral reefs. It offers excellent snorkeling and some of the best dive spots in the world. The Red Sea is rich in marine life, including sharks. 46-year-old Victor Kolai was on holiday with his family from Ukraine. They were staying in the Turan Island Hotel. They had been swimming in the hotel's pool, but they were keen to experience the snorkeling that the Red Sea had to offer. The family of 3 headed to the beach at Malia Sinai. The water was calm. There were plenty of other people in the water. Young families splashed in the shallows. Dive boats headed out beyond the reef. People lay on the beach. Victor, his wife Victoria, and son Ivan put their masks and snorkels on and jumped into the water. Kicking with their legs, they slowly propelled themselves forward toward the reef. As it came into view, fish and corals emerged from the shallows. The sunlight penetrated the water, dancing on the seafloor. Victor pointed out some of the fish to his son, and they both nodded at each other as they floated at the surface. But then Victor spotted something that made his heart leap out of his chest. Just 3 meters from where they swam, he saw the telltale outline of a shark, the characteristic tail movement as it swam toward them. It was a mako shark, 2.5 meters or 8 feet long and weighing around 250 kilograms or 550 pounds. They were 20 meters from the shore. There was no way they could outswim the predator. No way they could make it to dry land before it grabbed them, if that's what it wanted to do. The family came together, huddled in the water, unsure of the next move. They kept their faces below the surface so they could see the shark at all times. It began circling them, the circles getting closer and closer, tighter and tighter. It was sizing them up. It was trying to figure them out. Victor lifted his head up out of the water and looked back at the shore. They had to make a swim for it. If the shark grabbed them out here, then they were in big trouble. When the shark came closer still, continuing to circle the young family, Victor lashed out at it. He pushed it away with his hand. Its skin felt rough and abrasive against his hand. He pushed as hard as he could. The shark altered its position slightly, but it hadn't lost interest. Victor signaled for the others to swim for it. They turned and swam as fast as they could back to the beach, but terrifyingly, the shark followed them. Its dorsal fin broke through the surface of the water as the sea became shallower. Any minute now, Victor was expecting to feel a bite. He was expecting to feel the pain of a mouthful of teeth sinking into his flesh. He could see his son ahead of him. He could see him inching closer, ever closer to safety. Victoria wasn't far behind Ivan. Maybe they were going to make it. Maybe the shark had lost interest. But it hadn't. It pursued them up toward the beach. When the water was shallow enough, Ivan got to his feet and ran out of the water. He leapt over the wavelets, sprinting up to the dry sand. Only when he was safely ashore did he turn to look behind him and saw his two parents still swimming. Then he saw the shadow of the shark just feet from his father. It had turned away from Victoria and was now right on Victor's tail. It was coming in for an attack. He yelled at them to get out of the water. They were so close to the beach now. Victoria made it. She scrambled ashore, tripping and stumbling up through the shallows. When he was just 12 meters from shore, Victor stood up and raced toward dry land. He looked behind him and saw the shark coming for him. He took his mask and smacked it on the head. The hit seemed to have made the shark flinch slightly as it bit into Victor's leg, but it didn't get a proper grasp of it. It had missed a full-on attack by just millimeters. If it had latched on properly, then it would likely have pulled the young father off his feet and dragged him out to sea. Instead, its teeth sliced through Victor's right leg. The lacerations were superficial, and Victor was lucky to have gotten off lightly. As a precaution, he was taken to the hospital, but was released the next day. While Victor had a narrow escape, others weren't so lucky. Herein begins the terrifying December attacks in Sharm El Sheikh. Next to fall prey to a mako shark, likely the same one, was a Russian who was enjoying his holiday in the Red Sea resort on that same day. 54-year-old Marine Captain Yevgeny Trishkin was on the third day of his holiday. He had been enjoying some R&R and decided to go for a swim near Nama Bay. The beaches were clean and tidy. The water was a refreshing temperature to cool off from the afternoon sun. Women and children splashed in the water, laughing and shrieking in delight. It was a picture-perfect holiday scene, but soon word got out that a family had been chased by a shark and that a man had been bitten. Whilst lifesavers called for people to exit the water, Yevgeny changed into his blue swim shorts and pulled a mask and snorkel down over his face. He hadn't heard the warnings. He hadn't seen the panic as people left the water. Instead, he headed out toward the reef. The visibility should have been around 100 meters, but it had dropped to little more than 10. He entered the water in the area that was marked safe by a line and some buoys. The sea was busy. It was around 11 o'clock. People were enjoying a late morning swim before lunch. Lowering his face into the water, Yevgeny scanned the seafloor. There were brightly colored fish flitting and darting everywhere as he headed out toward the end of the pontoon. As children jumped from the pontoon into the water, Yevgeny floated past them. Then the sea opened up. He hovered above a huge drop-off. The seafloor fell from beneath him, the deep dark blue water contrasting with the lightness of the shallow reef. There were overhangs and caves and an eerie expanse in front of him. The depth plummeted to 60 meters or more. Then Yevgeny spotted something. There was something out there, something that merged with the deep dark blue of the ocean. It was getting closer, a dark shadow emerging from the depths. Yevgeny only realized it was a shark when it was too late. It had spotted the Russian from below and had made a beeline for him, torpedoing up through the water column. There was nothing Yevgeny could do. The shark had him in its sights and opened its jaws as it came in for the attack. It grabbed his left arm. He could feel the teeth penetrating his skin, tearing at his flesh, but he fought back. With his right arm, he began whacking the shark, smacking it on the nose. The shark shook his arm ferociously from side to side, but Yevgeny didn't give up. Suddenly, the shark let go. The punching and hitting seemed to have worked, but the shark only paused momentarily before crunching down on the other hand. Yevgeny gasped above the surface and screamed for help. Lifesavers were already yelling at people to get out of the water from Victor Coley's attack, but Yevgeny hadn't been aware. His cries were heard by those on the pontoon. They rushed to the water's edge in an effort to rescue him, their arms outstretched. He was just 20 meters from the jetty, but the shark was dragging him back. He couldn't break free. Yevgeny had lost a lot of blood. He could feel his body growing weak. He felt dizzy and lightheaded. It would be a matter of moments before he lost consciousness and potentially sank to the bottom of the ocean, or was torn to shreds by the unforgiving Mako shark. A lifesaver named Ahmed jumped into his white-bottom Zodiac and motored over to the Russian. The shark released its grip, and Ahmed leaned over the side of the boat and was able to pull him aboard. Yevgeny's arms were so severely damaged that Ahmed couldn't pull on them to bring him aboard. Just as Ahmed got him into the boat, the dorsal fin of the Mako shark surfaced before disappearing again. Then, as he and his team of lifesavers wrung out a blood-soaked towel over the side of the boat, the fin of a white-tipped shark surfaced, just feet from the boat. This white-tipped shark was about to cause a lot of damage further along the beach. They gently lifted Yevgeny onto the pontoon, and he was then rushed to the hospital. Both of his arms were in bad shape. There was potential for him to lose both, given the depth and size of the lacerations. In the end, surgeons amputated his left arm above the elbow, but managed to save the other. In Sharm El Sheikh, things were about to get worse. The terrifying nightmare was just beginning. Yet another Russian was about to meet her fate. It was still December 1st. It was still the same stretch of coastline. But word hadn't got out of the predator that was on the warpath that morning. The screams of the victims had been muted by the enjoyment of other holidaymakers. Officials were reportedly reluctant to close the beaches. They didn't want to scare people away. They didn't want to make a scene. A Russian mother and her daughter headed down to the beach near their hotel at the Maritime Resort. The two decided that they would have one last swim of the day before heading inside for something to eat. It was a decision that both of them would live to regret. The conditions were idyllic and perfect for a dip in the water. The air temperature was around 30 degrees Celsius or 86 Fahrenheit. The beach was sandy with golden outcrops of rock protruding into the sea. Yelena watched as her mother Olga pulled on her swimming fins and paddled into the ocean. She swam out a little way and then floated on her back. Yelena joined her moments later, the two enjoying each other's company in the perfect setting. Olga looked up at the clear blue sky, the coolness of the Red Sea engulfing her as she floated amongst a sea of other tourists. She was swimming in what is known locally as Shark's Bay, an ominous warning, perhaps, of the imminent danger she was in. Unbeknownst to her, there was something lurking beneath the surface, a predator that had been attracted to the area by the sounds and commotion of splashing tourists. It was a shark, believed to be a white-tip, a slower species compared to the Mako shark. This species swims over great distances to find its food, and once it has found it, it seldom leaves until it has had its fill. Olga closed her eyes and breathed in the warm sunshine. Then she felt something brush past her left hand. Despite the number of bathers in the water, she knew it wasn't another swimmer. This felt hard and rough against her skin, like sandpaper rubbing over her knuckles. She thought that perhaps it was a dolphin, an inquisitive mammal, playful and energetic. But this wasn't a dolphin, and it certainly wasn't being playful. It was a white-tip looking for a meal. It was known that dive operators in the Red Sea resorts used to feed sharks to provide an up-close and personal shark experience for tourists every year. They would feed the sharks with their hands, letting go of the bait at the last second as the shark opened its jaws. The dive operators also carried their bag of bait on a waistband around their backs for easy access. Although the feeding of sharks had since been banned in the region, it was thought that the sharks learned to associate people with food, and in this particular case, the shark possibly grabbed onto Olga's hand in an attempt for an easy feed. She felt a sharp tug. The shark had swum beneath her, eyeing her from below, before circling back around and clasping its jaws around her outstretched hand. Olga leapt into action. She could see the shadow of the shark's body beneath the surface of the water. She could see the jaws close around her hand as it began to thrash her around and around. She knew she was in trouble. She knew this could be the end. As the shark tried to drag Olga down beneath the waves, Olga fought back. She tried to stay above the water. Amidst the commotion, splashing, and screaming, the shark suddenly let go. Olga felt her hand come free, and she made a mad dash for it. She was just 30 feet from the jetty. It was tantalizingly close. She swam as fast as she could, terrified that the shark would come back for more. And that's just what it did. The shark followed her as she struggled to get away. It could see that it had injured its potential prey. Blood oozed from Olga's left hand and arm, a severe gash almost severing it from her body. The shark opened its jaws once more. Coming up behind her, it grabbed her backside. Olga screamed as she felt the shark's teeth sink into her flesh. The pain was indescribable. She was dragged underwater. Yelena could only watch in absolute horror as she watched her mother disappear from sight. The gray body of the shark arched out of the water as it pushed Olga downwards. The terrifying events were unfolding just feet away from other tourists and swimmers. Olga refused to give up. She made it to the surface again, and with all her might, she thrashed her flippers back and forth to propel her toward the jetty. Shocked onlookers hauled her out of the water. The shark was just behind her as they pulled her to safety. It had pursued her right to the end. As it was, Olga was in bad shape. She was laid down on the jetty. An ambulance arrived and sped toward the local hospital. But Olga lost her fight during transport momentarily. She had to be resuscitated. When she arrived at the hospital, she was barely conscious, and it was touch and go whether she would survive. In the operating room, she was given 6 units of blood to replace what had been lost, and her wounds were clean. The remains of her left arm had to be surgically removed, and she received emergency plastic surgery on the gaping wound in her buttock and upper thigh, taking skin from her hip to try and patch it up. The pain she experienced during those first days in the hospital was overwhelming. As she tried to stand up following the surgery, she would keel over in pain, unable to support her own weight. It would take a long time to recover from her traumatic attack, but for the tourist in Sharm El Sheikh, things were only just beginning. Less than 15 minutes after Olga was attacked, and while she was still receiving first aid treatment on the pier, another Russian woman fell prey to the same shark. The beaches should have been closed immediately. The water shouldn't have been deemed safe to swim in. The shark wasn't afraid of humans. Instead, it was enticed by them. It had tasted fresh blood, and the scent drove it mad with desire, an instinct to feed, an instinct to take down easy prey. Lyudmila Stolyarova told her husband Vladimir that she was going for a swim in the sea. She asked him if he would like to join her, but he declined. He was enjoying his book on the beach and left his wife to enjoy the water. As Lyudmila swam gracefully along the surface of the Red Sea, below her, dive instructor and guide Hassan Ali was viewing the marine life with a client. It was the last 10 minutes of their dive at the Coral Bay Resort when suddenly an inquisitive shark approached them. It was a female white-tip. She had a unique notch on her upper tail fin. As she came at the 2 divers, Hassan and his client assumed an upright position in the water column. They tucked their arms in tightly in an attempt to make themselves look bigger and remained motionless. Usually this behavior is enough to deter an inquisitive shark. It realizes that you are not worth the fight and swims on. But this shark was different. Her behavior showed that she was anxious and nervous. She was tense. Instead of swimming past the 2 divers, she circled them. With each orbit, the 2 divers watched her closely. It felt like an attack was imminent. She circled not once, not twice, but several times. Then, out of sight, she suddenly darted toward Hassan from behind him and swam inches over his head. 10 meters above them, Ludmilla kicked her legs as she tread water, gazing back at the shoreline. She was unaware of the attack that had just happened on Olga. She was unaware that the same shark now circled the water column directly below her. All of a sudden, Hassan watched as the shark shot upward toward the unsuspecting Russian. It erupted out of the water in an explosion. Ludmilla was sent flying out of the water. The shark grabbed her foot and bit it clean off. Blood poured into the water, so much so that it obscured Hassan's view. He immediately resurfaced with his client, handing her over to the dive master before swimming over to Ludmilla's rescue. Immediately after the shark severed Ludmilla's foot, it came back for more. She desperately tried to make it to the shore, but it bit into her right arm. Instinctively, she pulled her arm away, severely lacerating it, but it wouldn't let go. Finally, she was able to break free. She made it to the same jetty where Olga lay, the two women fighting for their lives side by side. Hassan administered first aid while someone ran over to Vladimir to tell him the devastating news. Ambulances arrived for both women, and they were carted off to hospital. Ludmilla had lost her foot, but surgeons needed to surgically amputate the lower leg just below the knee. Her right forearm was severed below the elbow, an elongated gash synonymous with her trying to pull her arm free from the serrated teeth. As she fought off the shark with her other hand, she lost the fingers. It was a brutal attack on the 70-year-old Russian tourist. She was lucky to survive such an ordeal, but the injuries she sustained were life-changing and wholly avoidable, according to shark expert Dr. George Burgess. He said that given the number of people in the sea at the time and the strong association the sharks in the area have with people and food, these attacks didn't come as a surprise to him. Glass-bottom boat operators throw chickens overboard to entice sharks closer to the boats. Divers hand-feed sharks in the area, carrying the bait in their bags tied to their waists. It is no wonder that the sharks are drawn to the area. There was a startling realization that the sharks attacked during mid-afternoon, the time when dive and boat operators headed out for their shark spotting trips. But these 4 tourists weren't the only ones to fall victim to a shark attack that week. Unbelievably, there was still more to come. Officials closed the beaches after the horrendous events on December 1st. Visitors were horrified by the events. They didn't go near the water. They barely set foot on the beach. No one lay on the deck chairs. Everyone remained within their hotels. The beaches were deserted. The Egyptian Environment Ministry was called in to investigate. They set out to hunt down the 2 sharks responsible. There was no way of telling if they were hunting the individuals that were responsible for the attacks, but the tourism trade was taking a serious hit, and they needed to act now. Divers and conservationists familiar with the waters and present at the time of the attacks were adamant that the sharks captured were not the same as the ones that had been photographed on the day of the attack. Their pleas, though, fell on deaf ears, and officials reopened the beaches, deeming the water safe to swim in once more. It was December 4th, just 3 days after the attacks. This was a mistake. There was still a man-eater on the loose, and it remained close to the shore. Unfortunately for Renata Seifert, who entered the water on December 5th, she was a 70-year-old German tourist. She had visited the resort of Sharm El Sheikh for the past 11 years, and swimming in the Red Sea was one of the activities she enjoyed the most. It was a way for her to keep active, a way to keep fit, but this was to be the last swim she would take. As she paddled out of the shallows and into deeper water, she swam toward the edge of the reef. Below her, the hypnotic deep blue of the open ocean. She was still just 30 meters or so from shore. As she turned around to head back to the beach, she felt a tug on her arm. It was a white-tipped shark. It was back for more. She was alone out there. Immediately, she screamed. Her screams were heard by those on the beach. People stood up from the safety of the sand, scanning the water. Then the sea erupted in a commotion. The shark could be seen thrashing around in the water. Renata was pulled under again and again, still struggling for breath. still struggling to fend off the shark as it sunk its teeth deep into her arm. A lifeguard rushed to her aid, but it was too late. He managed to pull her onto the reef, but her arm had been severely severed and she had lost too much blood. Renata lay motionless in the water. The sea turned red around her. Tragically, she died within minutes of the attack. It was a terrible end to a terrible week, one that will haunt those who were there to witness it. All the warning signs were there from the very first attack, and even before that. As tourists and dive operators continued to feed sharks, it's only natural for them to associate us with food. Although this particular shark seemed to be far more aggressive than normal whitetips, it is thought that sharks in the area were hungrier than ever as overfishing depleted their natural food source. It was May 21, 2023 in New Jersey. As the spring weather began to heat up, young surfer Maggie Drozdowski took to the sea with her friend Sarah O'Donnell. After strapping their surfboards to their legs, the pair jogged into the water and paddled out from the shore at 110th Street Beach in Stone Harbor. It was a glorious sunny afternoon, perfect for catching some waves. But their surfing trip was about to take a sinister turn. Stone Harbor on New Jersey's southern tip attracts thousands of visitors each year. Situated 30 miles south of Atlantic City, visitors are drawn to the white sandy beaches, the sailing excursions, boutique downtown shops, and the promise of excellent surf. Maggie and her family had traveled from Chester County in Pennsylvania, 90 miles northwest of the harbor. The surf was good. The two 15-year-old friends were enjoying the rush of the waves and the freedom of the great outdoors. But the pair wasn't alone. As they rode the waves, something lurked beneath the surface. A predator was on the prowl. It honed in on the two girls, investigating as it came closer and closer. Suddenly, a large wave knocked Maggie from her board. She fell into the water. When she surfaced, she looked around for her surfboard and grabbed hold of it. Her body and legs dangled in the water as she tried to pull herself back on board. But before she could do so, she felt it. Something large grabbed hold of her left foot. She didn't realize what it was at first, but it was strong and powerful. It had her in its grip and pulled her underwater. Unable to take a breath of air, Maggie's lungs felt as though they were going to burst. The pressure on her lower leg grew as she tried to kick the animal off, frantically shaking her leg and kicking with the other. Terrified, Maggie screamed under the waves, bubbles escaping from her mouth as she fought for the surface. Looking up, she could see shards of sunlight penetrating the water. She reached upwards, desperately trying to pull herself to safety. But she kept being pulled downwards. She kept kicking her leg, furiously trying to break free, but the creature held on. It felt like an eternity, but miraculously, she felt her foot pull free from the jaws of a shark, and she kicked for the surface. When she felt the cool air on her face, she gasped and took in a deep breath. She yelled at her friend Sarah, who paddled over. She splashed about in the sea, panicking and shouting that she had been bitten by something. Sarah told her to get on her board immediately and paddle to shore. Maggie climbed onto her surfboard, lying flat and pulling at the water with her hands. A trail of blood leaked from Maggie's torn foot, a trail that enticed sharks nearby. A tantalizing scent spilling into the ocean behind the two girls. Together, they inched towards the beach. With every minute that passed, Maggie's adrenaline surged. Was it still out there? Was it following them? Were they going to make it back to the shore? With her foot out of action, Maggie didn't manage to catch a single wave into shore. Instead, she paddled the whole way. The progress was slow. The beach never seemed to get any closer. Her arms were aching. Salt water stung her eyes, but she was focused on getting out of the water as quickly as possible. She didn't know how badly damaged her foot was. She hadn't taken the time to investigate. That didn't matter right now. It was an agonizing 4 minutes of frantic paddling before they made it to the shallows and jumped off their boards. They ran out of the sea and sat down on the beach, breathing heavily. They had made it. They had survived what they were soon to realize was a shark attack. Sarah didn't realize the seriousness of her friend's injury. She assumed Maggie had been pinched by a crab or something. It never crossed her mind that it could be a shark, and that it could have been a very different ending. But when they inspected Maggie's injury, they realized just how lucky they had been. It suddenly dawned on the two girls that it had been a shark that had bitten Maggie's foot. But what kind of shark and what size, they will never know. They never saw the animal. There was no sign of it in the water. No warning and no time to prepare for the attack. Sharks often test out their prey by biting it first. Only then do they realize that humans aren't their typical prey and they move off. But all too often, that first bite can be fatal, usually due to the blood loss the victim suffers. Only once they were out of the water and on the safety of the land did Maggie start to feel the pain from her injury. The deep gashes began to sting, her lower leg throbbed. They needed to get medical help as soon as possible. Infection can spread rapidly throughout the body following a shark bite. The two girls wrapped the foot up in a towel before Sarah helped Maggie hobble back across the beach with her surfboard. They made it back to her family, who was nearby. Deep lacerations covered her foot and calf. Blood oozed from the open wounds and spilled onto the sand. The blood flow was so great that Maggie feared she may lose her foot. She didn't know the extent of the damage. They called emergency services, and volunteer firefighters were the first responders to arrive on the scene. They began dressing Maggie's foot, trying to apply pressure to reduce the blood loss. She was then lifted onto an ATV and driven across the sand, before being transferred via ambulance to Cape Regional Medical Center. Once she was there, she received 6 stitches to close up her wounds. Although Maggie and Sarah didn't see the shark, the New Jersey State Southern Regional Medical Examiner said the injuries were consistent with a shark bite. Having survived the attack, Maggie has said that she is afraid to enter the water again. She knows how lucky she is to have survived, but it'll be a while before she paddles back out on her surfboard again. For a short while after the attack, Maggie moved about on crutches with her foot still heavily bandaged. She wanted to share her story in the hope of raising awareness to other beachgoers and surfers who entered the water. Her attack came just days after 2 men were bitten while fishing in the Florida Keys. The beaches along Stone Harbor weren't closed following Maggie's attack, but officials warned people to be extra vigilant and to take precautions, such as removing reflective jewelry and avoiding swimming in or near fishing areas. Shark attacks in New Jersey are incredibly rare. Since records began, there have only been 16 documented attacks in the state, with the previous attack happening back in 2006. In fact, Gavin Naylor, the director of the Florida Program for Shark Research, said that you're 200 times more likely to drown than you are to be bitten by a shark. As far as shark attacks go in the United States, Florida is the shark bite capital of the world. It was August 15, 2022, a beautiful sunny day, perfect for the beach. 55-year-old Karen Seitz and her family had traveled from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to spend an unforgettable vacation. They were all more than excited, especially Karen's grandchildren. The family had been planning this trip for over a year. Now, Karen and her husband were finally able to provide their grandchildren the perfect context to make some awesome memories. The kids were over the moon. Karen was too. She had always loved the beach ever since she was a child. There was nothing better than the gentle touch of the sun on her skin, and nothing better than the sound of the waves. August 15th was only the family's second day in Myrtle Beach, but they were already certain everything would be perfect during their stay. How could it not be when they were in one of the most iconic resort cities in the country? Located on the east coast of the United States in Horry County, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach is one of the major tourist centers in the states. Over 20 million tourists choose Myrtle Beach as their vacation destination each year. Maybe it's because of its subtropical climate, or maybe it's because of its miles and miles and miles of beaches. But the city is magnetic. The Grand Strand, an arc of beachland whose primary city is Myrtle Beach, has hundreds of hotels, thousands of restaurants, and tens of golf courses. Myrtle Beach is home to numerous events. It's a city that generally guarantees a good time, equal time relaxation, and more hectic activities. However, not everyone is lucky enough to engage with Myrtle Beach the way they were supposed to. That's what 55-year-old Karen Seitz found out on Monday, August 15, 2022. The day started out beautiful. The sun was up, the sky was blue. The waves of the Atlantic were singing. You know, the proverbial idyllic day at the beach. Karen Seitz and her husband were lying on the beach, carefully supervising their grandchildren. The kids were playing in the sand, happy and at peace. Around afternoon, Karen had an idea. She told her grandchildren they should get in the water, either for a swim or a fun splash. But once they got into the water, the kids' reaction surprised the 55-year-old grandmother. "What if there are sharks? What if there are sharks?" they kept asking. It was strange. Usually, Karen's grandchildren loved the water and never complained about a quick swim. Karen decided that despite the strangeness of the reaction, her grandchildren's worry was just a normal, childish fear. It was her duty as a grandmother to reassure them. "Oh, don't be afraid. It's so rare that anybody ever gets bit by a shark," Karen told the kids. The woman then waited just a few feet away from Brian, her 8-year-old grandson. She was in waist-high water. The water felt nice until it suddenly didn't anymore, and Karen was left fearing for her life. It seemed like her grandchildren's words were more than a childish fear. In retrospect, their words were prophetic. In an instant, a creature jumped out of the water and latched its teeth on Karen's right arm. It was a shark, and a hungry one at that. At first, Karen felt a sharp pain, a pain unlike any other she'd ever felt before. In the first few seconds, the woman had no idea what kind of creature had attacked her. In fact, she thought it was anything but a shark. If she had to guess, she would have said it was a jellyfish currently attached to her arm. But when Karen Seitz looked down, she came face to face with the truth. Her attacker was indeed a shark. As soon as the woman realized what was happening, she acted. It had more to do with her strong survival instinct than with her giving much thought about the right way to proceed. The woman used her left arm to push the creature away, and shockingly, it worked. It was like the shark only wanted to get a small taste, though the bite was anything but small. Brian Seitz, Karen's 8-year-old grandson, watched in shock, only a couple of feet away. He had seen everything. The shark jumping out of the water, latching itself on Brian's grandma's arm, waving its tail, and then finally letting go and falling down into the water. And as if that sight hadn't been scary enough, he was now faced with the sight of a bloody, terrified Karen. The woman and her grandchildren hurried toward the shore. Once they made it to the beach, they were surrounded by people. The racket was deafening. People were yelling, trying to warn others about the danger lurking beneath the waves. Others were still in the water, making their way toward the shore in an erratic manner. It was madness. Karen was still in shock once she got on the beach. She kept saying she didn't want to see her arm. She could feel the sharp pain and the blood trickling down her arm. Luckily, help was seconds away. An ER worker who happened to be at the beach heard the noise and rushed to help Karen, washing the woman's injured arm with bottled water. Minutes later, Karen Seitz was taken to the hospital where she underwent surgery. Hundreds of stitches later, Karen was ready to start her way toward recovery. She had suffered damage to her ring finger as well, but the surgery was a success. She was released from the hospital only a day after the attack. Despite this, doctors couldn't guarantee Karen's arm would ever be the same. The shark had actually somewhat damaged the woman's nerves and tendons as well. All things considered, though, the injuries could have been so much worse. Not to mention, Karen's grandchildren could have been hurt too. And they were, in a sense. 8-year-old Brian Seitz, who had witnessed the whole thing, was left traumatized by the attack and the possibility of losing his grandmother in front of his very eyes. But the Seitz didn't let the attack destroy their vacation. They decided to stay in Myrtle Beach for the week and try to enjoy the city's other attractions.
They even visited the beach again, though Brian decided to stick to sunbathing and playing on the sand. "I'll sit on the sand, but I ain't going in the water," the little boy told reporters. There was another shark attack on Monday, August 15th, only about half a mile away from where Karen was bitten. This time, the victim was luckier. The second attack was a more glancing bite to the leg, with no real repercussions. 4 shark attacks were reported in South Carolina a year before, in 2021. Experts advise against swimming in the ocean at dawn or dusk when sharks approach the coast to feed, to leave the water when schools of fish are seen close to the surf, and to avoid areas where people may be using bait to fish. Daniel Abel, a professor of marine science at Coastal Carolina University, said this after Karen Sight's ordeal. "It's very important that we treat our sharks, our ocean, and our entire planet with more respect than we do now." It was February 19, 2023, a Sunday, and Chris Davis was having a pleasant day in New Caledonia. Davis was 59 years old, but far from being anything but a strong, resilient man. In fact, Chris Davis was an experienced triathlete. Over the years, the man had represented his native Australia in age group world championship events several times. Triathletes are all about endurance, speed, and strength. They take part in competitions that require them to swim, cycle, and run. In a few words, they're tough. But Davis wasn't in New Caledonia to train for a competition. In fact, he was there for a far more simple, more pleasant reason: a vacation. New Caledonia isn't as popular as other dreamy destinations, say the Bahamas or Hawaii, but this doesn't mean the place is without its wonders. In fact, the opposite is true. New Caledonia is a collective of overseas France. Its inhabitants are French citizens who vote for the President of France. Despite this, the archipelago enjoys a quite significant autonomy. The dozens of islands that make up New Caledonia are located some 900 miles east off the coast of Australia, in the South Pacific. The place has increasingly become more and more popular with Aussie tourists. After all, it's just a 3-hour flight from Sydney to Noumea, New Caledonia's capital city. After the flight, tourists are free to experience a one-of-a-kind place, one that combines the spirit of the French Riviera with the exotic beauties of the South Pacific. Like many other Aussies in the past few years, 59-year-old Chris Davis chose New Caledonia as his travel destination. He probably made an educated decision, because the place is perfect for the more active travelers, such as past triathletes. Water sports are a big thing in New Caledonia, and so are diving, snorkeling, hiking, and horse riding. On February 19, 2023, Chris Davis was in Noumea, New Caledonia's capital, enjoying a day at the Chateau Royal Beach. Located just in front of the Chateau Royal Beach Hotel, this particular beach was bound to be popular. The day was beautiful, and the beach was more than crowded. People frolicked on the sand as well as in the sapphire blue water. None of them seemed to have a care in the world, and why would they? With the sun shining and the exotic views of New Caledonia, life seemed to be nothing short of perfect. In reality, there were plenty of reasons to be concerned, and all of them had to do with sharks. Sure, Australia is no stranger to sharks and other deadly creatures, and neither is the USA. In fact, New Caledonia ranks 13th in the world for the number of shark attacks. While this is still a precarious position, New Caledonia's waters are still generally considered pretty safe. But pretty safe is not the same as 100% safe. There had been many signs that all was not well in the South Pacific paradise. The Chateau Royal Beach had been the site of an almost deadly shark attack less than a month before, on January 29th. On that day, a 49-year-old woman named Bridget Dew entered the water and was viciously attacked by a shark. The woman lost a hand, 4 fingers, and part of her leg in the attack, but she survived. Only days after, a foil surfer was also attacked by sharks, but the man managed to escape unscathed. Still on February 19, 2023, Chris Davis entered the water for a swim. Maybe he didn't know about the previous attacks, or maybe he thought he would be safe. After all, he wasn't the only one brave enough to venture in the water that day. There were many, many others. Children swam alongside their parents. The day was bright and full of joy, but that was about to change. Davis entered the waves and started swimming, some 450 feet away from the shore. He was no amateur. He had strength, endurance, and technique, all of them things that are generally required of triathletes. But these qualities weren't enough to save the man. Something happened. As the man was pulled beneath the waves, others looked in horror. Those still in the water scrambled toward the shore, toward safety. Those already on the beach watched in horror, petrified by the scene unfolding in front of their eyes. They could see the shark, and they could see the man thrashing as if he was struggling to get away from something. Children screamed, burying their heads in their parents' embrace. Soon enough, the water turned crimson, and then in a blink of an eye, it was all over. The man was left lying face down in the bloodied water, his limp body carried by the waves. Jet skiers rushed to help the man. When they reached him, it was clear Davis was no longer conscious. Still, they struggled to get Davis on a jet ski without causing him any further damage. His injuries were gruesome, too horrible to look at, but they needed to save him. Once Davis was safely taken to the sand, paramedics started their relentless effort to keep him alive. Unfortunately, it was too late. Over 40 minutes of CPR proved to be fruitless. Chris Davis was dead, horribly attacked by a shark. His injuries were simply too serious. According to paramedics, he was bitten 3 times on his right leg. He also suffered extensive injuries on both of his arms. Beaches in the area were immediately closed after the attack. Authorities knew they had to capture the shark and make sure it wouldn't attack anybody else. Sonia Lagarde, Nouméa's mayor, ordered sharks in the nearby waters to be culled. No one in the area was allowed to enter the water anymore. It was too dangerous. Meanwhile, while authorities were on the hunt for the animal, an autopsy revealed Chris Davis never stood a chance. According to the grim autopsy reports, any one of Davis's injuries was enough to kill him. Davis suffered an incredibly large bite to his thigh, extending 14.5 inches from the hip to the knee, causing a deep lesion with the section of the femoral artery. This injury caused massive blood loss, which was enough to kill the man on its own. To top it off, Davis's other injuries were also deemed fatal. They were located on the man's upper limbs, the forearm, and the hands. 3 days after the attack, New Caledonia authorities shared a picture of a huge 13-foot shark captured in the area where Davis was swimming at the time of the attack. The huge shark was immediately believed responsible for the attack. Its size and location fit the profile. The animal was killed shortly after being captured. Chris Davis's body was returned to Australia to his family. The man was survived by his wife and by his 3 adult sons. The family released a statement regarding Davis's tragic fate. The statement said, "We are deeply mourning the loss of our beloved husband and father, Chris Davis." Chris was a senior software programming consultant in the superannuation and funds management industry and a keen triathlete, having represented Australia several times in age group world championship events. The family also took their time to thank New Caledonia authorities for their efforts in trying to save Davis's life. They expressed their sincere gratitude. Her initial cries for help were ignored and taken for nothing more than a childish prank meant to frighten other beachgoers. In this video, we'll tell the story of Sarah Wiley, a young woman who met her end in the shark-infested waters of Amity Point on North Stradbroke Island, Australia. There are many versions of this story out there. This one is based on recurring details that can be found in most, if not all of them. Make sure to let us know what you think really happened in the comments below. January 7, 2006. 21-year-old Sarah Wiley was visiting North Stradbroke Island with several of her friends from a church group. They were having a normal, fun day at the beach in the waters of Amity Point, where they were renting a holiday house. They were tourists on North Stradbroke Island, and with this came a serious fault. Unlike locals of the island, Sarah and her group didn't know just how dangerous those particular waves were, and they weren't aware that in those weather conditions, sharks were more likely to come closer to shore, dangerously looking for any source of nutrition. As the day was coming to an end, Sarah Wiley unwittingly rushed toward a fateful, bloody encounter, one that would spark a conversation about the safety of Australian waters. Also known as Straddy, or North Straddy, North Stradbroke Island is located in the Australian state of Queensland, just some 19 miles southeast of the center of Brisbane. It's the home of Amity, a rural town which is scarce in locals but abundant in tourists. The village is situated on the northwestern point of North Stradbroke Island, known as Amity Point. Directly adjacent to it lies Rainbow Channel, the entry to Moreton Bay. The channel is close to shore, but it's also tidal and deep. As the locals know, shark sightings aren't rare. But Sarah Wiley wasn't a local. She was a tourist who loved swimming, and she was good at it. She had been swimming before she could even walk. According to her family, being in water was Sarah's second nature. It was normal for her to push her limits as she moved swiftly through the waves. But as fate sometimes has it, her biggest pleasure would also bring her untimely end. January 7, 2006 was an extraordinarily overcast day. The sky was completely covered in clouds, and there wasn't much light. Even more, there had been a fairly big storm the previous night. That meant that the water was still murky and quite dirty. There was a lot of wash-off. Still, it wasn't enough to deter 21-year-old Sarah Wiley and her church friends from taking a swim. The group of friends got in the waters at Amity Point. The beach was unpatrolled, which may have contributed to the appeal of the place. The day was slowly coming to an end, but there was still time for a couple more minutes of frolicking in the waves. It was initially reported that Sarah Wiley was swimming in water not even up to her neck when disaster struck. However, according to witnesses, the girl swam out of the clear shallows and into the deeper water of Rainbow Channel. Being an experienced swimmer, Sarah was probably confident in her abilities, but as it turned out, she shouldn't have been worried about her prowess. Instead, she should have been worried about what hid beneath the waves. Soon she came upon marker buoys signifying the presence of drumlines. Drumlines are aquatic traps meant particularly for large sharks. Usually deployed near popular swimming beaches, they're used to lure and capture the predators in order to reduce the probability of shark attacks. Getting close to the drumlines meant Sarah Wiley was getting close to baits and aquatic detritus. By swimming there, the young woman put herself at risk, but she did so unknowingly. By the time she got there, it was probably too late to alter the gruesome course of the events. Sarah was making her way back, swimming toward the shore. She wasn't very far away from her friends when it all happened. Suddenly, she disappeared. When she emerged 5 or 6 seconds later, there was just one word she could utter. "Shark!" she screamed, terrified and hurt. Her friends and other beachgoers couldn't see anything at first, so naturally they thought the young woman was joking, trying to pull a prank on her friends, especially since there were a lot of dolphins in the water. Meanwhile, Sarah was being mauled by sharks. When she started screaming again, people finally realized the severity of the situation. Her friends rushed toward the young woman, and so did other beachgoers. Accounts of what exactly happened vary wildly. What we do know is that after realizing Sarah was actually in mortal danger, people rushed to help her. Among them was Josiah Tupou, who was at the beach with his pregnant wife and his 5 kids. When he heard the screams of terror, Josiah sprung into action. There was a chance the girl was only joking, yes, but what if she was drowning and yelled "shark" because she knew it would catch the attention of more people? Or what if there were truly sharks in the water, attacking her? As he made his way in the water, Josiah could see Sarah bobbing up and down, struggling. His relative, Ungu Tupou, also rushed to help. When he went to grab Sarah's arm in order to pull her out, the man was terrified to see her arm simply wasn't there anymore. Rescuers finally managed to get Sarah out of the water. They used towels, trying to stem the blood flow. Sarah's injuries were extensive. It was plain to see her condition was critical. The girl was bleeding heavily. Her arms, her legs, and her torso had all suffered horrific injuries. When Queensland ambulance paramedics reached her, Sarah was barely alive. Her friends and other beachgoers were left in shock, hugging and crying long after paramedics had departed with Sarah. She was airlifted to Brisbane's Alexandra Hospital and was reportedly rushed into surgery. It wasn't enough to save her. 21-year-old Sarah Wiley died shortly after due to massive blood loss and shock. All beaches within more than a mile stretch, both east and west of the spot of the attack, were immediately closed. Although they weren't 100% sure, investigators made an educated guess and assumed multiple sharks were responsible for the attack. Police and fishermen set off to search the waters, trying to find the sharks, although they knew it was a virtually impossible task. The attack sparked a conversation about safety measures, mainly because that particular beach was protected by Queensland's Shark Safety Program and had been so since 1997. Then Acting Premier Anna Bligh ordered an investigation to assess whether the program was still effective. According to her, the attack proved the Shark Safety Program wasn't an impenetrable barrier between bathers and sharks. Initial reports said Sarah had been swimming with her dog, which was reportedly what had attracted the sharks in the first place. But these accounts soon proved to be false. In fact, there wasn't one specific reason for the attack. There were multiple ones. The gloomy weather and the murky water contributed to the events. And obviously, so did the fact that Sarah had unwittingly swum too close to the baits. The hour was also a factor, with the attack reportedly happening sometime around 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon. And it all happened in January, when sharks are particularly active in the region. To most locals, the attack on Sarah Wiley could be seen as inevitable. Many of them were even surprised that something like that hadn't happened sooner. According to locals, there was a difference between them and mere visitors. Visitors didn't know the water. There should have been warning signs upon entering the beach. About 400 mourners attended Sarah Wiley's funeral. She was loved by her community and remembered as a fun-loving girl who lived life at full speed. According to her friends, Sarah had always been an exceptionally compassionate girl. Sadly, hers was the first shark-related death at a beach protected by Queensland's Shark Safety Program since the program's implementation in 1962. There are a few things that you can do to reduce the risk of being attacked by a shark in Australia. First, avoid swimming in areas where sharks are known to be present, such as near seal colonies or areas where there has been a recent shark attack. Second, stay in groups when swimming, as sharks are more likely to attack solitary individuals. Third, avoid swimming at dawn, dusk, or at night, as these are the times when sharks are most active. Finally, if you see a shark, try to get out of the water as quickly and calmly as possible.